What if everything you've been taught about handling stress, anxiety, and sleepless nights has been completely backwards? What if a man from 2,500 years ago discovered the one secret that could end your suffering tonight? Welcome to Moonmind Temple. I'm about to share something that will sound impossible. There's a collection of stories so powerful that people who listen to them report falling into the deepest, most peaceful sleep they've had in years. Others say their anxiety simply vanished. Here's what's strange. These aren't just bedtime stories. They're ancient keys that unlock something already inside you, something that's been waiting patiently beneath all that worry and exhaustion. In the next 3 hours, you'll discover why a serial killer became Buddha's most devoted student, how a woman cured her rage with a mysterious bottle of water, and the 3 words Buddha spoke that instantly stopped a man from destroying his entire family. If it feels right, share where you're listening from in the comments. Are you lying awake in Chicago at 2 a.m., commuting through morning traffic in London? There's magic in knowing we're all here together, finding peace across every corner of this restless world. Grab the softest blanket you own, dim those lights, and settle into the quietest space you can find. For the next 3 hours, you don't need to fix anything, solve anything, or even stay awake. Just listen. These stories will work their ancient magic while you rest. Tonight, we discover what Buddha knew about the peace that's already yours. There was once a day when Buddha was walking with his closest students along a dusty road that stretched between 2 ancient villages. The sun hung heavy in the afternoon sky, and their robes clung to their skin with the kind of heat that makes every step feel like walking through honey. After hours of traveling, they came upon a beautiful lake that sparkled like scattered diamonds in the sunlight. Buddha paused at the water's edge, and his followers gathered around him, grateful for this moment of rest. The lake was perfectly still, so clear you could see smooth stones resting on the bottom and small fish darting between patches of sunlight. Buddha turned to his youngest disciple, a man named Ananda who had been walking in silence, lost in worried thoughts about the challenges that lay ahead in their journey. "Ananda," Buddha said gently, his voice carrying the kind of warmth that immediately puts a troubled heart at ease. "I find myself quite thirsty. Would you be so kind as to bring me some water from this lake?" Ananda bowed respectfully and walked toward the water's edge, cupping his hands in preparation. But just as he knelt beside the lake, something unexpected happened. A group of village children came running down the hillside, laughing and shouting as they splashed into the water to escape the afternoon heat. Their feet kicked up clouds of mud and sand from the lake bottom. At the same moment, a farmer appeared with his ox-drawn cart, crossing directly through the shallow part of the lake. The heavy wooden wheels churned through the water, stirring up even more sediment. Within minutes, the crystal-clear lake had transformed into a swirling, muddy pool where you couldn't see your own reflection, let alone the bottom. Ananda stared at the murky water, his heart sinking. How could he possibly offer this muddy, turbulent water to his beloved teacher? The water looked completely undrinkable, thick with dirt and debris, nothing like the pristine lake they had discovered just moments before. He returned to Buddha with empty hands and a troubled expression. "Master," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "I cannot bring you this water. The lake has become muddy and disturbed. It would not be fit for you to drink. Perhaps we should continue walking until we find another source." Buddha looked at his student with eyes full of understanding and the faintest hint of a smile. "Let us rest here under this tree for a while," he suggested, settling himself comfortably in the shade of an ancient fig tree whose branches stretched wide over the water. "The walking has been long, and sometimes the wisest action is simply to be still." The disciples arranged themselves around their teacher, some closing their eyes to meditate, others gazing out at the slowly moving water. Time passed quietly, the kind of peaceful silence where you can hear your own heartbeat and feel the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Birds called softly from the trees overhead, and a gentle breeze began to stir the air. After about half an hour had passed, Buddha turned again to Ananda. "My friend," he said with the same gentle warmth as before, "would you now go to the lake and bring me some water to drink?" Ananda looked puzzled but obediently rose and walked back to the water's edge. What he saw there took his breath away. The lake had returned to its original crystal clarity. All the mud had settled naturally to the bottom, and the water above sparkled clean and pure in the afternoon light. Small fish swam lazily through shafts of golden sunlight, and he could once again see every stone and pebble resting peacefully on the lake floor. With wonder in his heart, Ananda carefully filled a wooden bowl with the clear, fresh water and brought it to Buddha. As he offered the bowl, Buddha accepted it with both hands, as if receiving a precious gift. He took a slow, mindful sip, then looked directly into Ananda's eyes. "Tell me, my dear student," Buddha said quietly, "what did you do to make this water clean?" Ananda thought for a moment, then replied honestly, "I did nothing at all, Master. I simply waited." The mud settled by itself, and the water became clear again. Buddha nodded slowly, and his smile deepened. "This is one of life's most profound teachings," he said, his voice carrying the weight of infinite compassion. "Your mind, Ananda, is exactly like this lake. When it becomes disturbed by worry, anger, fear, or endless thinking, it grows muddy and unclear. In those moments, you cannot see clearly, you cannot think clearly, and you certainly cannot find peace. But here is what most people never understand. You do not need to fight the muddy water. You do not need to strain it, filter it, or stir it more vigorously. The very act of fighting against disturbed thoughts only creates more disturbance, just as thrashing in muddy water only makes it muddier. Instead, when your mind becomes turbulent with stress, worry, or overwhelming emotions, the wisest thing you can do is exactly what we did here by this lake. Simply be still. Do not judge the muddiness. Do not try to force clarity. Just allow yourself to rest and watch with gentle patience as your mind naturally returns to its original state of peace. In our modern world, we carry this ancient wisdom like a hidden treasure. When your day feels overwhelming, when anxiety clouds your thoughts, when stress makes everything seem impossible, remember this lake. Your racing mind is not broken. It is simply stirred up by the demands and pressures of daily life. The peace you seek is not something you need to create or achieve. It already exists within you, waiting patiently beneath the surface disturbance. Just as the lake never lost its essential purity, even when filled with mud, your mind never loses its natural clarity, even in moments of greatest confusion. This is why meditation works, why deep breathing helps, why stepping away from problems often leads to solutions. You are not adding peace to your life. You are allowing the peace that was always there to reveal itself once again. Tonight, as you listen to these stories, let yourself be like that lake. Rest. Be still. And trust that your mind knows exactly how to find its way back to the clarity that is your birthright. As Buddha continued his travels through the ancient villages of India, he carried with him very few possessions. Among these simple belongings was a beautiful ceramic bowl that had been gifted to him by a devoted villager whose sick child Buddha had helped heal through his compassionate presence. This wasn't just any ordinary bowl. It had been crafted by skilled hands, painted with delicate lotus flowers that seemed to dance around its curved surface, and glazed to a shine that caught the morning light like captured sunshine. The bowl had traveled with Buddha for many months, serving him faithfully during countless meals, shared with his disciples under starlit skies and in humble village homes. It had held rice offered by grateful farmers, water drawn from mountain streams, and simple vegetable broths prepared by monks who found joy in serving their teacher. To his followers, this bowl had become almost sacred, a symbol of their master's journey and the love that people felt for his teachings. One particular morning, as golden light filtered through the leaves of a grove where they had spent the night, Buddha sat peacefully with his disciples, preparing for their daily meal. A young monk named Rahula, who was actually Buddha's own son, approached carrying the morning's simple offering of rice and lentils. The camp was filled with the quiet contentment that comes from sleeping under open sky and waking with the natural rhythm of the earth. As Buddha reached for his cherished bowl, something unexpected happened. Perhaps it was the morning dew that had made the ground slightly slippery, or maybe it was simply one of those moments when the physical world reminds us of its unpredictable nature. The beautiful bowl slipped from Buddha's gentle hands and fell onto a rock beside his sleeping place. The sound that followed was sharp and final, the unmistakable crack of ceramic breaking. The bowl split cleanly into several pieces, its lovely lotus paintings now fragmented across the scattered shards. The morning's rice spilled across the earth, mixing with dirt and fallen leaves. Buddha's disciples gasped in dismay. Some immediately rushed forward, trying to gather the broken pieces as if they might somehow be made whole again. Others looked stricken, as though they had personally failed their teacher by allowing this accident to happen. A few began expressing their sorrow aloud, lamenting the loss of such a meaningful and beautiful object. But Buddha himself remained completely still, gazing down at the broken bowl with the same serene expression he might wear while watching clouds drift across the sky. There was no flash of disappointment in his eyes, no tight grip of frustration around his mouth, no hurried movement to salvage what remained. He simply observed what had happened with the kind of peaceful acceptance that comes from understanding something profound about the nature of all things. After a few moments of contemplative silence, Buddha spoke in a voice so calm and gentle that it immediately soothed his distressed followers. "Why do you look so troubled, my dear friends?" he asked, his tone carrying genuine curiosity rather than any hint of sadness or loss. "Master," one of the older disciples replied, his voice heavy with concern, "your beautiful bowl is broken. The bowl that was given to you with such love, that has served you so faithfully, it's gone. How can we not feel sorrow at such a loss?" Buddha smiled with the kind of warmth that immediately lightens a heavy heart. He gestured gently toward the scattered pieces. "This bowl has not gone anywhere," he said softly. "It is exactly where it has always been, right here with us. It has simply changed its form. You see, my friends, when this bowl was whole, you called it beautiful and precious. Now that it has broken, you call it lost and worthless. But tell me, what has actually changed except your thoughts about it?" He picked up one of the larger pieces, turning it gently in his hands. "This fragment still carries the same lotus painting that brought you joy yesterday. The clay from which it was made is the same earth that nurtures the plants we eat. The hands that shaped it put the same love and skill into their work, whether the bowl stands whole or lies in pieces. The only thing that has truly changed is your attachment to a particular form. You loved the bowl when it served your idea of what a bowl should be. But your love was conditional, dependent on the bowl remaining exactly as you wanted it to remain forever. This is where we create our own suffering," Buddha continued, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had seen deeply into the heart of human pain. "We fall in love with the temporary form of things, and then we suffer when those forms inevitably change. We forget that change is not something that happens to break our happiness. Change is the very nature of existence itself. Everything you see around you is in constant flow. Your body is changing with every breath, every heartbeat. The seasons change, bringing new flowers that bloom and fade. People enter our lives and eventually depart. Even the mountains and oceans are slowly transforming, though we cannot see it happening. When we truly understand this impermanence, We don't love things less. We love them more freely. We appreciate the morning sunlight without demanding it stay forever. We enjoy a friend's laughter without clinging to that exact moment. We receive gifts with gratitude while holding them lightly, knowing their forms will change, but their essence remains. Buddha set down the broken piece and brushed the rice dust from his hands. "This bowl served me perfectly when it was whole," he said with deep contentment. "Now it serves me perfectly by teaching us about the freedom that comes from releasing our grip on how we think things should be. True peace doesn't come from keeping our possessions intact, our relationships unchanging, or our circumstances exactly as we prefer them. True peace comes from understanding that we can find joy and meaning in every form that life takes, whole bowls and broken ones, sunny days and rainy ones, moments of gain and moments of loss. When you no longer need life to be different than it is, you discover that life is already perfect, exactly as it unfolds. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop caring. It means you learn to flow with reality instead of fighting against it. Tonight, as you rest, consider what broken bowls you might be carrying in your own heart. What changes have you been resisting? What losses have you been turning into suffering by wishing they hadn't happened? See if you can hold these experiences the way Buddha held his broken bowl, with acceptance, with understanding, and with the deep peace that comes from knowing that nothing is ever truly lost. It only changes form, and every form has its own perfect purpose in the great unfolding of your life. As the warm afternoon sun filtered through the leaves of the great Bodhi tree, Buddha sat peacefully with his closest disciples gathered in a circle around him. The day's teaching had covered many aspects of the path to enlightenment, but one young monk named Kassapa seemed troubled, shifting restlessly on his meditation cushion. Finally, he gathered the courage to approach his teacher with a question that had been weighing heavily on his heart. "Master," Kassapa said, bowing respectfully, "I find myself struggling with something that brings me great shame. Despite all my meditation practice and study of your teachings, I still find myself becoming angry over small things. Yesterday, when a fellow monk accidentally knocked over my water bowl, I felt such rage arise within me that I spoke harshly to him. How can I control this anger that seems to have a life of its own?" Buddha looked at his student with infinite compassion, recognizing the sincere desire for growth behind the question. Several other disciples leaned forward, for this was a struggle they too had experienced on their spiritual journey. The master smiled gently and settled himself more comfortably against the tree trunk. "My dear Kassapa," Buddha began, his voice carrying the warmth of understanding, "let me share with you a story that will illuminate the path beyond anger. Listen carefully, for within this tale lies medicine for the troubled heart." The disciples arranged themselves more attentively, knowing that their teacher's stories always contained profound wisdom, disguised as simple narratives. Buddha's eyes took on the distant look of someone seeing across both time and space as he began to speak. In a village not far from here, there once lived a woman named Priya, whose heart carried a storm that never seemed to calm. Though she possessed many wonderful qualities, a generous spirit, skilled hands, and deep love for her family, she struggled with anger that erupted like a volcano at the smallest provocation. If her husband left his sandals in the wrong place, she would explode into shouting that echoed through the entire neighborhood. If her children spilled water while helping with chores, her rage would fill their home with tension that lingered for hours. Even a neighbor's goat wandering into her garden would trigger harsh words that made grown adults look away in embarrassment. What made this truly heartbreaking, Buddha continued, his voice filled with compassion for all beings who suffer, was that Priya herself knew how destructive her anger had become. After each outburst, when the fire in her chest finally died down, terrible shame would wash over her. She would see her family's frightened faces, hear the echo of her own harsh words, and wonder how someone who loved her children so deeply could speak to them in ways that made them flinch. Late at night, she would lie awake, promising herself that tomorrow would be different. But morning would come, and within hours, some small frustration would trigger the same explosion, leaving her feeling more hopeless than before. Her husband began working longer hours, not because the crops demanded it, but because home felt like walking on broken glass. Her children learned to move quietly, speaking in whispers and avoiding anything that might accidentally awaken their mother's fury. The joy that should fill a family home was slowly being replaced by nervous tension. One morning, as Priya sat alone at her weaving loom, her hands trembling from another sleepless night of guilt, she heard a gentle knock at her door. When she opened it, she found a traveling sage standing there, an elderly man with kind eyes, and the sort of peaceful presence that immediately made her feel both hopeful and deeply ashamed. "Good morning, sister," the sage said, with a voice like warm honey. "I'm traveling through your village, and I wondered if you might spare a small portion of food for a hungry traveler." Priya's natural generosity awakened, and she invited the sage inside, quickly preparing a simple meal. As he ate with obvious gratitude, something about his peaceful manner made her feel safe enough to share the burden she had been carrying alone. "Holy One," she said quietly, "I have a terrible problem. I have this anger inside me that erupts like a volcano, destroying my family's happiness. I love my husband and children more than life itself, yet I speak to them with such harshness that they've begun to fear me. I've tried everything, prayers, promises, even holding my breath when I feel anger rising. But nothing works. The moment something frustrates me, words pour out like poison, and I can't seem to stop them. Please, if you have any wisdom that might help, I'm desperate to find peace." The sage listened with complete attention, then reached into his traveling bag and withdrew a small glass bottle filled with clear liquid. He held it as if it contained something precious. "Sister," he said gently, "what I'm about to give you is very powerful medicine for anger. It has helped many people find peace, but it must be used exactly as I tell you, or it won't work. Are you willing to follow my instructions precisely? Priya nodded eagerly, her heart filling with hope. Yes, Holy One. I'll do exactly as you say. The sage placed the bottle carefully in her hands. When you feel anger beginning to rise, even the smallest irritation, immediately take this bottle and place exactly 4 drops on your tongue. Then, and this is crucial, you must keep your mouth completely closed for 10 full minutes. Do not speak. Do not try to swallow quickly. Just let the medicine rest on your tongue while you remain silent. If you open your mouth even once during those 10 minutes, the medicine will lose all its power. But if you can remain silent for the full 10 minutes, you'll find that your anger dissolves completely. That very afternoon, Priya had an opportunity to test the medicine. Her youngest son accidentally knocked over a pot of curry she had been simmering for hours. She felt the familiar fire igniting in her chest, angry words already forming. But instead of letting them explode outward, she remembered the sage's instructions. With shaking hands, she retrieved the bottle, placed 4 drops on her tongue, and pressed her lips firmly together. At first, the anger still raged inside her, demanding expression. But with her mouth sealed, the angry thoughts had nowhere to go. They swirled for a few minutes, then gradually began to lose intensity. By the time 10 minutes passed, the fire had cooled to barely warm embers. Instead of seeing her son's accident as carelessness worthy of punishment, she saw it for what it truly was, a simple mistake made by a frightened child. When she finally opened her mouth, her words surprised everyone. "It's okay, my dear one," she said gently. "Accidents happen. Let's clean this up together." Day after day, Priya used her medicine, and each time the same miracle occurred. The silence gave her anger time to cool naturally, and she discovered that most triggers were actually quite small and manageable when approached with a calm mind. After 7 days, her entire household had transformed. Her children began laughing freely again. Her husband started coming home earlier. Neighbors began visiting, drawn by the peaceful energy flowing from her home. When the sage returned a week later, Priya greeted him with joy radiating from her entire being. "Holy One, your medicine is miraculous. I haven't lost my temper once. How can I ever thank you?" The sage smiled with gentle amusement. "My dear sister, there was no medicine in that bottle. It contained only water from the village well. The real medicine was something you carried within yourself all along, the power of silence. When you kept your mouth closed, you discovered what wise people have known for thousands of years. Anger cannot survive without the fuel of words. Most anger lives not in our hearts, but in our mouths. It grows stronger every time we speak it, every time we give it voice. But when we remain silent, anger has no food to sustain itself. Like a fire without wood, it simply burns out naturally. Between feeling anger and expressing anger, there is always a choice. In that space of silence, wisdom can arise, compassion can awaken, and you can respond from your highest self rather than your most reactive self. Buddha paused, allowing the story's wisdom to settle into his disciples' hearts. He looked directly at Kassapa, whose face now showed deep understanding. "You see, my dear students," Buddha concluded softly, "anger is like a burning coal that you pick up with the intention of throwing at someone else. You are the one who gets burned first. But silence is the cool water that extinguishes the coal before it can cause harm to yourself or others. This is why we practice mindful speech, why we cultivate the pause between stimulus and response. In that sacred space of silence, we remember who we truly are, not creatures driven by every passing emotion, but beings capable of wisdom, compassion, and peace. As word spread through the countryside that Buddha had arrived in the village of Rajagriha, people came from many miles around to seek his wisdom and find relief from their various forms of suffering. Among those drawn to the great teacher was a man whose life had been marked by poverty so severe that each day was a struggle simply to find enough food to survive. His name was Kanthaka, though few people knew it, for he was known to most simply as the beggar, a thin, weathered man who could be seen each morning, walking through the village streets with empty hands extended, hoping for a few coins or a small portion of food from anyone willing to spare it. His clothes were patched and faded from years of wear, his sandals held together with strips of cloth, and his belongings consisted of nothing more than a small cloth bundle containing a wooden bowl and a tattered blanket. Kanthaka's days followed the same difficult pattern. He would rise before dawn in whatever sheltered corner he had found to sleep, often under the eaves of a temple or in the doorway of a closed shop, and begin his daily rounds through the village. Sometimes people would take pity on him and offer a handful of rice or a small copper coin, but just as often he would encounter turned backs, closed doors, and faces that looked through him as if he were invisible. What made his poverty even more painful was the constant comparison he couldn't help but make with the lives of others around him. He would watch merchants counting their profits in the marketplace, see families sharing abundant meals in their comfortable homes, and observe well-dressed children playing with toys he could never afford. Each sight seemed to deepen his sense of being forgotten by fortune, abandoned by the gods, and cursed with a fate he had done nothing to deserve. Night after night, as he settled into whatever shelter he could find, Kanthaka would look up at the stars and wonder why life had been so cruel to him. "Why was I born into such poverty?" he would whisper to the darkness. "What terrible thing did I do in a past life to deserve this endless struggle? Why do the gods smile on others while turning their faces away from me?" When news reached him that the great Buddha, the awakened one whose wisdom was said to bring peace to even the most troubled hearts, had come to their village, Kanthaka felt a spark of hope ignite within his chest. Perhaps this holy man would have answers to the questions that tormented him, or better yet, perhaps he might even possess the power to change his circumstances entirely. For several days, Kanthaka positioned himself along the path that led to the grove where Buddha was staying, watching the steady stream of visitors who came and went. What struck him as remarkable was the transformation he witnessed in people's faces. They would arrive looking burdened, worried, or sad, but when they returned from their audience with the teacher, their expressions had changed completely. There was a lightness in their steps, a peace in their eyes, and sometimes even quiet joy radiating from their entire being. If this Buddha can bring such transformation to others, Kanthaka thought to himself, surely he can help someone like me who needs it more than anyone. With this hope filling his heart, he finally gathered the courage to join the line of people waiting to speak with the enlightened teacher. When his turn finally came, Kanthaka found himself standing before a man whose presence was unlike anything he had ever experienced. Buddha sat peacefully beneath an ancient banyan tree, and though he wore the simple orange robes of a monk and possessed no material wealth, there was something about him that radiated a richness far beyond anything money could buy. His eyes held depths of compassion that seemed to see directly into Kanthaka's heart, and his smile conveyed an acceptance so complete that the beggar immediately felt both welcomed and understood. Kanthaka prostrated himself before Buddha, then looked up with eyes full of pain and confusion. "O Blessed One," he began, his voice trembling with years of accumulated frustration, "I have come to you because I cannot understand my fate. Almost everyone in this village lives in comfort and happiness. They have food on their tables, roofs over their heads, and money in their pockets. But I have nothing. I am forced to beg for every morsel of food, every tiny coin just to survive another day. Why have the gods been so cruel to me? What terrible wrong have I committed to deserve such poverty, while others are blessed with abundance? I work when I can find work. I harm no one. I try to be respectful to all I meet. Yet I remain trapped in this life of endless want and need. Please, if you have any wisdom that can explain my suffering or any power that might change my circumstances, I beg you to help me." Buddha listened to every word with the kind of complete attention that made Kanthaka feel as though his pain was being truly heard for the first time in his life. When the beggar finished speaking, Buddha looked at him with infinite gentleness and said something that initially shocked him. "My dear friend," Buddha said softly, "you are poor because you have never learned to give." Kanthaka's eyes widened in disbelief, and he could barely contain his reaction. "Blessed One," he replied, his voice rising slightly with emotion, "surely you must be testing me or speaking in riddles. How can you suggest that I should give when I am the one in need of receiving? Look at me. Look at these empty hands, these patched clothes, this thin body that shows the marks of countless hungry days. I have absolutely nothing to give to anyone. I can barely keep myself alive from one day to the next. How can someone who must beg for survival be expected to give to others? I eat only what people are kind enough to share with me. I own nothing of value, have no money to spare, no possessions to offer. With respect, Blessed One, your words seem to mock my circumstances. Buddha's expression remained completely peaceful, and he smiled with the kind of understanding that only comes from seeing deeply into the nature of reality. My friend, he said gently, you believe you have nothing to give, but this belief itself is what keeps you trapped in poverty. You are far richer than you realize, but you have never learned to recognize the treasures you carry with you every single day. Look at your face. Do you not have a smile? That smile is a gift more precious than gold to someone who is drowning in sadness. A genuine smile costs you nothing, yet it can light up another person's entire day. When you smile at a child, at an elderly person struggling with heavy burdens, at anyone who crosses your path, you give them a moment of joy that no amount of money can purchase. You have a mouth and a voice. Do you not have the ability to speak kind words? Words of encouragement to someone who feels hopeless. Words of comfort to someone in pain, words of appreciation to someone who has been ignored. These words are treasures that create more abundance than overflowing granaries. You have eyes. Do you not have the power to look at others with compassion and understanding instead of judgment? When you truly see someone, when you look past their outer circumstances to the human heart that beats within them, you give them the gift of being valued. This is wealth beyond measure. You have hands and strength in your body. Can you not offer help to someone who needs it even more than you do? An elderly person carrying a heavy load, a mother struggling with small children, a neighbor trying to repair something broken. Your assistance, freely given, creates bonds of community and kindness that are the true foundation of prosperity. Buddha paused, allowing his words to penetrate Kanthaka's understanding, then continued with even greater gentleness. You see, my friend, you have been looking at wealth completely backwards. You believe that you must first have material possessions before you can afford to be generous. But the truth is exactly the opposite. Generosity creates abundance, not the other way around. When you give freely from what you do have, your smile, your words, your attention, your help, you send a message to the universe that you are not someone who lacks, but someone who has enough to share. This shift in your inner attitude changes everything about how life responds to you. The poverty you experience is not truly about money or possessions. It is about a mindset of scarcity that sees only what is missing instead of recognizing what is already present. Once you release this inner sense of lack and begin to give from the abundance you already possess, you will discover that the outer circumstances of your life begin to shift as well. As Buddha's words settled into his heart, Kanthaka felt something profound shifting within him. For the first time in years, he began to see possibilities instead of only limitations. He realized that every day brought him countless opportunities to give opportunities he had been blind to because he had been so focused on what he lacked rather than what he possessed. From that day forward, Kanthaka began to live differently. He started each morning by looking for ways to serve others, offering his genuine smile to everyone he met, speaking words of encouragement whenever possible, and helping wherever his hands could be useful. Gradually, people began to respond to him differently, seeing him not as a burden but as a blessing. Opportunities for work appeared, friendships developed, and his circumstances slowly but steadily improved. Most importantly, he discovered that true wealth had been with him all along, not in his empty pockets, but in his capacity to bring light to others' lives through the simple gifts of presence, kindness, and care. During one of Buddha's teaching sessions in a peaceful grove outside the village of Shravasti, a middle-aged merchant named Virat approached the circle of disciples with a face etched by deep lines of worry and exhaustion. His shoulders sagged as if carrying an invisible weight, and his eyes darted nervously as though his mind were racing through an endless list of concerns that never seemed to diminish. Virat had traveled many days to find Buddha, driven by a desperation that had been growing stronger with each passing month. As a successful trader, he managed multiple business ventures, supported an extended family, and carried responsibilities that seemed to multiply faster than he could handle them. But what troubled him most wasn't the work itself. It was the constant crushing weight of worry that had begun to consume his every waking moment. "Blessed One," Virat said, as he bowed before Buddha, his voice trembling with fatigue, "I have come seeking your wisdom because I feel as though I am drowning in my own thoughts. Every day brings new concerns that pile upon the old ones. I worry about my business ventures, about having enough money to support my family, about my children's futures, about my aging parents' health. I worry about decisions I made years ago and decisions I must make tomorrow. These worries follow me everywhere, when I'm trying to work, when I'm with my family, even when I attempt to sleep. They circle in my mind like vultures, growing stronger and more overwhelming with each passing day. I feel constantly exhausted, but I cannot seem to put these burdens down. How can I find relief from this endless mental suffering that seems to have no solution?" Buddha listened with complete attention, observing not just Virat's words but the tension in his body, the rapid rhythm of his breathing, and the restless energy that indicated a mind that had forgotten how to be still. Without saying anything immediately, Buddha reached for a simple clay cup that sat nearby and filled it with fresh water from a pitcher beside him. Holding the cup steady in his right hand, Buddha looked directly at Virat and asked, "Tell me, friend, how heavy do you think this cup of water is?" Virat looked puzzled by what seemed like an odd question given the serious nature of his suffering, but he answered respectfully, "Blessed One, it appears to be quite small. I would guess it weighs no more than a few ounces, certainly nothing that would be difficult to hold." Buddha nodded thoughtfully and continued holding the cup perfectly still. "You are quite right," he agreed. "This cup weighs very little, and as you can see, I can hold it easily without any strain or discomfort. But tell me, what do you think would happen if I continued to hold this cup for the next hour without setting it down? Virat considered the question carefully. Well, blessed one, I imagine that after an hour, your arm might begin to feel tired from holding it in the same position for so long. The cup would feel heavier than it does now, even though its actual weight hasn't changed at all. Exactly, Buddha replied, still maintaining his steady grip on the cup. And what if I were to hold it for an entire day without rest? By then, Virat answered, beginning to see where this demonstration might be leading, your arm would likely be in considerable pain. The muscles would be cramped and aching. What started as a light, manageable weight would feel unbearably heavy, even though the cup itself remained exactly the same. Buddha smiled with gentle approval and carefully set the cup down on the ground beside him. As he flexed his fingers and relaxed his arm, he looked directly into Virat's troubled eyes. My dear friend, this simple cup demonstrates the exact nature of your suffering, Buddha explained, his voice carrying the warmth of complete understanding. Your worries and concerns are like this cup of water. Each individual worry, when it first arises, may be quite manageable, no heavier than this small cup. The problem is not the weight of any single concern, but the fact that you have been carrying all of them continuously, never setting them down, never giving your mind a moment of rest. When you hold on to a worry for hours, it becomes more burdensome. When you carry it for days, it grows heavier still. When you clutch the same concerns for months or years, they become so overwhelming that they seem impossible to bear, even though the actual situations they represent may not have changed at all. The cup doesn't become heavier by sitting in my hand. My arm becomes tired from holding it. Similarly, your problems don't necessarily become worse over time. Your mind becomes exhausted from carrying them without relief. The solution is not to pretend your concerns don't exist, just as the solution to my tired arm was not to pretend the cup wasn't there. The solution is to learn when and how to set them down, to give your mind periods of rest and renewal, just as I gave my arm relief by placing the cup on the ground. Buddha gestured toward the peaceful grove around them, where birds sang softly and sunlight filtered gently through the leaves. This is why we practice mindfulness and meditation, not to escape from life's challenges, but to learn the art of carrying them wisely. When you set aside dedicated time each day to simply be present in this moment, without rehearsing past regrets or future fears, you give your mind the same relief I gave my arm. During these periods of mental rest, you discover something remarkable. Many of the worries that seemed so urgent and overwhelming begin to appear in their true proportion. Some reveal themselves to be much smaller problems than they appeared when you were carrying them constantly. Others show you solutions that were invisible while your mind was cramped with tension. Most importantly, you remember that you are not your worries. You are the awareness that can observe worries arising, acknowledge them, address what needs attention, and then consciously choose to set them down when carrying them serves no useful purpose. Buddha picked up the cup once more, held it briefly, then set it down again with deliberate mindfulness. Practice this simple wisdom, my friend. Each evening, consciously set down the concerns you have been carrying all day. Each morning, pick up only what truly requires your attention, and only for as long as that attention serves a useful purpose. Your mind, like my arm, will grow strong through this practice of knowing when to hold and when to release. This is the path to carrying life's burdens with grace, rather than being crushed beneath their accumulated weight. There came a time in Buddha's life when his disciples, having heard many teachings and witnessed countless demonstrations of their master's wisdom, felt ready to understand the deepest truths of existence. They had learned to calm their minds like still water, to release their attachments like broken bowls, and to speak with the wisdom of silence. But something in their hearts yearned for the profound understanding that had transformed their teacher from a seeking prince into an awakened being. One evening, as they sat beneath the same type of fig tree under which Buddha had found enlightenment years before, the eldest disciple, Sariputta, approached his master with a request that came from the depths of his soul. "Blessed One," he said with deep reverence, "we have been privileged to learn from your wisdom and to witness the peace that radiates from your being. But we hunger to understand the foundation upon which all your teachings rest. Would you share with us the story of that sacred night when you discovered the truths that set you free from all suffering?" Buddha's eyes grew distant, as if seeing across the years to a time when he was still Prince Siddhartha, still searching, still carrying the weight of questions that seemed to have no answers. The other disciples gathered closer, sensing that they were about to receive something precious, the intimate account of the moment when their teacher had crossed from darkness into light. "My dear friends," Buddha began, his voice carrying the depth of someone who had journeyed to the very heart of existence and returned with treasures beyond measure. "I will share with you not just what happened that night, but the 4 fundamental truths that revealed themselves to me, truths that explain why all beings suffer and how that suffering can finally come to an end." Before that night of awakening, I had been searching for 6 long years. I had practiced extreme austerities until my body was like a skeleton, thinking that by punishing my flesh, I could free my spirit. I had studied with the wisest teachers of my time, mastering meditation techniques that could transport consciousness to the highest realms. Yet despite all these efforts, the fundamental questions that had driven me from my palace remained unanswered. Why do all beings suffer? Why does life seem filled with dissatisfaction even for those who have everything they desire? Why do we experience moments of happiness only to watch them fade away, leaving us hungry for more? And most importantly, is there a way to find lasting peace in a world that seems designed to disappoint us? Buddha paused, and in that silence, his disciples could feel the weight of these universal questions that every human heart has pondered. They leaned forward, knowing they were about to receive answers that had eluded seekers for countless generations. On that full moon night in the month of Vaisakha, I approached a magnificent fig tree whose branches spread wide like protective arms. I had recently accepted a bowl of rice pudding from a kind village girl named Sujata, having realized that extreme asceticism was just another form of attachment to the idea that suffering the body would liberate the spirit. I spread a cushion of grass beneath that tree, the very tree that would later be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. As I settled into meditation posture, I made a vow that would determine the course of not just my own destiny, but the spiritual heritage of countless beings who would follow. I will not rise from this spot, I declared to the universe itself, until I have found the answers that will free all beings from suffering. Though my body may wither, though my mind may be tested by every force of illusion and fear, I will remain here until enlightenment is achieved or death claims me. As the night deepened, I entered into meditation deeper than any I had ever experienced. It was as if layers of confusion and ignorance began peeling away from my consciousness, like old bark falling from a tree. In the first watch of the night, I gained the ability to see my past lives stretching back through countless existences. I witnessed the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth that all beings experience, driven by desires and actions whose consequences ripple across lifetimes. In the second watch, I developed the divine eye that could see the death and rebirth of all beings throughout the universe. I understood how karma, the law of cause and effect, determines where consciousness goes after death, how good actions lead to fortunate rebirths and harmful actions lead to suffering states. But it was in the third watch of the night, as dawn approached, that the most profound revelations came. Like the sun rising to dispel darkness, 4 fundamental truths about existence blazed forth in my consciousness, with such clarity that they seemed to illuminate not just my mind, but the very fabric of reality itself. The first truth struck me like lightning illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness. I saw with perfect clarity that life, as we ordinarily experience it, is characterized by dukkha, a word that encompasses suffering, dissatisfaction, imperfection, and the basic unreliability of conditioned existence. This doesn't mean that life contains only pain and no joy. Rather, I understood that even our happiest moments carry within them the seeds of dissatisfaction. When we experience pleasure, we worry about losing it. When we achieve goals, we quickly set new ones, never finding lasting fulfillment. When we love someone, we fear separation. Even when everything in our external life seems perfect, there remains an underlying restlessness, a sense that something is missing. I saw that birth involves suffering, the trauma of entering this world. Aging involves suffering, watching our bodies and minds decline. Sickness involves suffering, experiencing pain and limitation. Death involves suffering, facing the unknown and leaving behind everything familiar. But beyond these obvious forms of suffering, I recognized the more subtle suffering that permeates all conditioned existence, the suffering of constant change, of never being able to hold on to anything permanently. As this first truth settled into my understanding, the second truth arose with equal clarity. I saw the root cause of all this suffering, tanha, which means thirst or craving. This is not just wanting things, but the deep-seated psychological compulsion to grasp after experiences, to make permanent what is inherently impermanent, to find satisfaction in what cannot ultimately satisfy. I understood that we suffer because we are constantly reaching for something else, more pleasure when we have pleasure, different circumstances when we face difficulties, eternal continuation of what we love, immediate removal of what we dislike. This craving operates on 3 levels. First, there is craving for sensual pleasures, not just physical pleasures, but any experience that gratifies our desires. Second, there is craving for existence itself, the desperate wish to continue being, to maintain our identity and experiences forever. Third, there is craving for non-existence, the wish to escape, to annihilate what we find unbearable. All of these forms of craving arise from a fundamental ignorance about the nature of reality. We believe that lasting happiness can be found in temporary things. We believe that we are separate, permanent selves who can possess and control our experiences. This ignorance fuels the endless cycle of desire, temporary satisfaction, dissatisfaction, and renewed desire that keeps us trapped in suffering. But even as I saw the depth of this predicament, the third truth dawned like the sun breaking through storm clouds. I realized that the cessation of suffering is possible. Nirvana, the extinguishing of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, is not just a theoretical possibility, but an achievable reality. When craving is fully understood and released, when the grasping mind learns to let go, when we stop demanding that reality be different from what it is, suffering ends. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means discovering a peace that isn't dependent on external circumstances, a joy that doesn't require constant feeding, a love that doesn't turn into attachment. Finally, as the first rays of sunlight touched the earth, the fourth truth revealed itself, the path that leads from suffering to freedom. I saw with perfect clarity the 8 interconnected practices that, when followed together, gradually purify the mind and lead to complete liberation. This 8-fold path includes right understanding of these very truths we are discussing, right intention to follow the path with wisdom and compassion, right speech that is truthful and kind, right action that harms no living being, right livelihood that supports rather than undermines spiritual development, right effort that is persistent but not excessive, right mindfulness that maintains clear awareness of present moment reality, and right concentration that develops the deep states of meditation necessary for final insight. As this complete understanding crystallized in my consciousness, I felt something profound shift within my entire being. The seeking was over. The questions that had driven me from my palace through years of searching to this tree, on this night, had found their answers. I was no longer Prince Siddhartha, the seeker. I had become Buddha, the awakened one who had found the end of suffering. Buddha looked around at his disciples, whose faces showed the deep impact of receiving these profound teachings. These four truths are not philosophical concepts to be debated, but medicine for the human condition. They show us exactly where suffering comes from and exactly how to heal it. This is the path I offer to all beings, not blind faith, but clear understanding that can be tested and verified through direct experience. Tonight, as you rest, let these truths settle into your hearts like seeds planted in fertile soil. Tomorrow, we will explore how to walk this path that leads from suffering to the peace that surpasses all understanding. As the disciples continued to absorb the profound teachings of the Four Noble Truths, Buddha noticed that while they understood the concepts intellectually, some still struggled with what it truly meant to live with complete selflessness. They had grasped the idea that attachment causes suffering, but the deeper question remained: how far should one's compassion extend? What does it look like to love so completely that even the self becomes an offering? Buddha settled more deeply beneath the spreading branches of their teaching tree, and his voice took on the quality of someone sharing a story that had traveled across many lifetimes to reach this moment. "Let me tell you about a king," he began, "whose generosity became so pure that it challenged the very gods to understand the depths of human compassion. In ancient times, there ruled a king named Mahadana in a prosperous kingdom nestled between mighty rivers and fertile valleys. This was not just any ruler seeking to build monuments to his own glory, but a man whose heart had been opened by suffering early in his life. As a young prince, he had witnessed terrible famines that left children begging for grain, devastating floods that destroyed entire villages, and plagues that separated families forever. These experiences had planted a seed of understanding deep within his soul, that the happiness of a king means nothing if his people suffer, that personal wealth is meaningless when surrounded by poverty, and that true power lies not in taking, but in giving. When he ascended to the throne, King Mahadana made a vow that would define not just his reign, but the very essence of his being. "As long as I draw breath," he declared before his court and his people, "no one in my kingdom shall go without food, shelter, or care if it is within my power to provide it. My treasury exists not for my pleasure, but for the welfare of all beings. My palace doors shall remain open to any who need help, and my heart shall remain open to any who suffer." And so he lived, year after year, with a generosity that became legendary throughout the land. Farmers whose crops failed would find grain delivered to their homes from the royal granaries. Merchants who lost their goods to bandits would receive loans with no expectation of repayment. Orphaned children would be cared for as if they were the king's own sons and daughters. Even travelers from distant lands found themselves welcomed with the same warmth as beloved family members. But what made King Mahadana's generosity truly remarkable was not just its scope, but its spirit. He gave not to be praised, not to earn merit for a future life, not even to feel good about himself. He gave because he had come to understand that there was no real difference between his happiness and the happiness of others. When he fed a hungry child, he was feeding the hunger that lived in his own heart. When he sheltered a homeless family, he was healing the homelessness that all beings feel when separated from love. News of this extraordinary king eventually reached the realm of the gods, where such selfless compassion was spoken of with wonder and admiration. But among the divine beings, there was one who found it difficult to believe that any human could possess such pure motivation. This god named Indra had seen countless rulers who appeared generous in public while remaining selfish in private. Surely, he thought, this king's generosity must have limits. Driven by curiosity and perhaps a touch of divine skepticism, Indra decided to test the true depth of King Mahadana's compassion. Disguising himself as an old, frail beggar with clothes that hung in tatters and skin weathered by years of hardship, he appeared at the palace gates on a day when the king was holding his regular audience for any who needed assistance. When the disguised god's turn came to approach the throne, he walked forward with the unsteady gait of someone who had traveled far on tired feet. King Mahadana immediately rose from his throne and stepped down to meet the beggar at eye level, as was his custom with all who came seeking help. "Welcome, honored elder," the king said with genuine warmth, helping to steady the old man with his own hands. "Please, sit and be comfortable. What can I provide for you? Are you hungry? Do you need a place to rest? Whatever is within my power to give, I offer freely." The disguised Indra looked up at the king with eyes that seemed to peer directly into his soul. "Your Majesty," he said in a voice that quavered with age, "I have heard stories of your boundless generosity that seem too wonderful to believe. They say, there is nothing you would not give to help another. But surely such stories must be exaggerated. Tell me honestly, is there anything you would refuse to give if someone truly needed it?" King Mahadana considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, then answered with complete sincerity. "Honored Father, I have never encountered a request for help that I could not fulfill in some way. If someone needs food, I share what I have. If someone needs shelter, my palace has many rooms. If someone needs comfort, I offer my presence. I cannot imagine a situation where I would turn away someone who genuinely needed assistance." The beggar's eyes grew more intense, and his voice took on a quality that seemed to come from beyond the physical realm. But what if someone asked for something that seemed impossible to give? What if the request challenged everything you hold dear? What if helping another required the ultimate sacrifice? Without hesitation, King Mahadana replied, "Then I would make that sacrifice gladly. My life belongs not to me alone, but to all beings who might benefit from it. If my death could somehow serve the greater good, if it could relieve suffering or bring peace to others, then it would be a privilege to offer it." The disguised god leaned forward, his voice now carrying the weight of ultimate testing. "Then I ask you now, great king, give me your life. I am a hungry spirit who can only be satisfied by the sacrifice of one who has lived with perfect compassion. Will you die so that I might live?" The court gasped in horror at this impossible request. Guards moved forward to protect their beloved king, and courtiers began shouting that the old beggar must be mad. But King Mahadana raised his hand for silence, and his face showed no trace of fear or hesitation. "Of course," he said simply, as if he had been asked for a cup of water rather than his life. "If my death can truly serve to end your suffering, then it is not a loss, but the greatest gift I could possibly offer. Please, tell me how you would like this to be done, and I will comply immediately." The king's response was so immediate and genuine that even the disguised god was stunned. But King Mahadana had already begun to prepare, calling for his ministers to ensure the kingdom would be well governed after his death, speaking words of love to his family, and arranging for his wealth to be distributed among the poorest citizens. As the king knelt before the beggar, ready to offer his life with the same joy he had once offered gold and grain, the old man's appearance began to shimmer and change. The tattered clothes transformed into robes of celestial light, the bent frame straightened into divine majesty, and the weathered face revealed itself as that of Indra, king of the gods. "Rise, noble king," Indra said, his voice now resonating with divine authority and deep respect. "I came to test your generosity, but instead you have taught me the true meaning of selfless love. Never have I witnessed such complete compassion, even among the gods themselves. Your willingness to give your very life without hesitation shows that you have transcended the illusion of separation that keeps most beings trapped in selfishness. I do not require your death. I required only to witness the purity of your heart. You have shown that true generosity is not about giving things, but about giving oneself completely to the welfare of all beings. Live long, King Mahadana, and continue to be a light that shows others the path to selfless love." Buddha looked around at his disciples, whose faces reflected deep contemplation of this powerful teaching. "You see, my friends, this story reveals the ultimate truth about compassion. Real generosity is not measured by how much we give, but by how completely we give it." King Mahadana understood what many seekers spend lifetimes learning, that the self we think we must protect is actually the very barrier that prevents us from experiencing true joy. When we hold nothing back, when we offer our lives completely to the service of all beings, we discover that we lose nothing and gain everything. For in that moment of total surrender, we realize that we were never separate from those we serve. Their happiness is our happiness. Their freedom is our freedom. Their peace is our peace. This is the generosity that leads to enlightenment, not just the giving of material things, but the offering of our entire existence to the awakening and welfare of all life. The profound teaching about King Mahadana's selfless generosity had left the disciples in a state of deep contemplation, their hearts opened to new understanding about the nature of true compassion. As the evening air grew cooler and the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Buddha noticed that some of his students seemed to be struggling with something that often challenges those who seek wisdom. They had heard countless teachings, absorbed profound concepts, and understood intellectually the principles of the Dharma. Yet there was a restlessness in their eyes that suggested they were still trying to grasp enlightenment with their thinking minds, still attempting to capture truth in the net of words and concepts. Buddha recognized this struggle intimately, for he had once walked the same path of seeking understanding through accumulating knowledge rather than direct experience. Without saying anything about what he had observed, Buddha rose quietly and walked to a nearby lotus pond that reflected the early stars like scattered diamonds on dark water. The lotus plants grew abundantly there, their broad leaves floating serenely on the surface, while their pristine white blooms emerged untouched by the muddy water that nourished their roots. He selected a single lotus flower that had opened perfectly in the day's warmth, its petals pure and luminous in the twilight. Returning to where his disciples sat waiting, Buddha took his place before them in complete silence, holding the lotus gently in his right hand. The disciples expected him to begin speaking about the flower, perhaps to use it as a metaphor for the pure mind emerging from the mud of worldly existence, or to explain how its beauty demonstrated some profound truth about the nature of reality. They had grown accustomed to their teacher's skillful use of examples from nature to illuminate complex spiritual principles. But Buddha simply sat in perfect stillness, gazing at the lotus with a gentle smile, saying nothing at all. Minutes passed in complete silence. The disciples began to shift uncomfortably, wondering if their teacher was waiting for them to ask a question, or perhaps testing their patience in some way they didn't understand. Some of the monks exchanged puzzled glances, their minds racing as they tried to decipher what lesson Buddha intended to convey through this wordless display. Others attempted to analyze the symbolism of the lotus, mentally cataloging everything they had learned about its significance in spiritual teachings. A few closed their eyes and tried to meditate, thinking perhaps that was the appropriate response to their teacher's silence. But one disciple, the Venerable Mahakasyapa, looked at the flower and at Buddha's serene expression, and something extraordinary happened. Instead of trying to understand what the flower meant, instead of searching for hidden meanings or waiting for explanations, he simply saw what was there, the perfect simplicity of the moment, the complete teaching that existed beyond all words and concepts. A smile began to dawn on Mahakasyapa's face, not the smile of someone who has figured out a puzzle, but the smile of someone who has suddenly awakened from a dream of complexity into the brilliant simplicity of direct truth. His smile grew wider and more radiant as he realized that he had been looking everywhere for what was already completely present, seeking in elaborate teachings what was available in this very instant of pure awareness. Buddha noticed Mahakasyapa's transformation immediately, and his own smile deepened with the joy of a teacher whose student has finally understood not just the lesson, but the reality that transcends all lessons. Still holding the lotus, Buddha looked directly into Mahakassyapa's eyes and spoke the only words he would utter during this entire teaching session. I have the treasure of the true Dharma I, the wonderful mind of Nirvana, the true form of the formless, the subtle Dharma gate that does not rest on words and letters, but is a special transmission outside of all teachings. This I entrust to Mahakassyapa. With these words, Buddha gently placed the lotus flower in Mahakassyapa's hands, and the other disciples witnessed something that would become legendary in the annals of spiritual transmission. They saw that understanding had passed between teacher and student in a way that had nothing to do with explanations, analysis, or intellectual comprehension. The deepest truth had been communicated in pure silence, recognized in a moment of direct seeing, and confirmed by the natural arising of profound joy. Later that evening, after the formal teaching session had concluded and most of the disciples had retired to their meditation huts, a small group approached Buddha with questions that had been burning in their hearts since the flower ceremony. "Master," asked Ananda, who served as Buddha's attendant and had witnessed countless teachings, "we don't understand what happened tonight. You held up a flower and said nothing, yet Mahakassyapa seemed to receive some profound transmission. What did he understand that we did not? What was the teaching in that silence?" Buddha looked at them with infinite patience and compassion, understanding their confusion, but also knowing that the very nature of their question revealed why they had missed the transmission. "My dear friends," he said gently, "you are asking me to explain in words what can only be understood beyond words. You want me to describe in concepts what exists prior to all concepts. This is like asking someone to capture the moon's reflection in a bucket of water. You may catch something that looks like the moon, but it is not the moon itself. What Mahakassyapa understood cannot be taught in the way I teach you about meditation techniques or ethical conduct. Those teachings point toward truth, like fingers pointing at the moon. But what happened tonight was direct contact with truth itself, like suddenly realizing you are the moon and have always been the moon. When I held up that flower, I was not trying to communicate any particular idea or concept. I was simply presenting reality as it is, perfect, complete, and utterly simple in every moment. Most of you immediately began thinking about the flower, analyzing it, waiting for me to explain its significance. Your minds were so busy looking for meaning that you missed the meaning that was staring you directly in the face. But Mahakassyapa did something different. He stopped thinking about the moment and simply entered it completely. He stopped trying to understand and simply allowed understanding to arise naturally. In that instant of pure presence, without the filter of concepts or the barrier of seeking, he recognized what has always been true, that every moment, every flower, every breath contains the complete teaching. You see, my friends, the deepest wisdom cannot be contained in books or captured in words. It lives in the space between thoughts, in the silence between sounds, in the stillness that exists right now as you listen to these words. All of my teachings are ultimately invitations for you to discover this wisdom that you already possess, this understanding that is your very nature. The flower I held tonight was not special. Any flower would have served the same purpose. The silence was not mysterious. It was simply the absence of unnecessary noise. The transmission was not magical. It was simply the recognition of what is always available when the mind stops grasping and allows itself to rest in natural awareness. This is why we practice meditation, why we cultivate mindfulness, why we study these teachings. Not to accumulate more knowledge, but to clear away the mental noise that prevents us from recognizing the wisdom that is our birthright. Not to achieve some special state, but to realize the perfection that exists in this very moment, exactly as it is. Tonight, as you rest, see if you can approach your experience the way Mahakasyapa approached that flower. Instead of thinking about your breathing, simply breathe. Instead of analyzing the sounds around you, simply listen. Instead of trying to understand peace, simply be peaceful. In that simplicity, you may discover that the greatest teachings are not heard with the ears, but recognized with the heart that has remembered how to be still. As the gentle wisdom of the flower sermon continued to resonate in the hearts of Buddha's disciples, the master observed that while Mahakasyapa's sudden awakening had been inspiring, it had also created a new form of restlessness among some of the other monks. They began to wonder why their own enlightenment hadn't arrived with such apparent ease, why years of dedicated practice seemed to bring only gradual progress, rather than the dramatic breakthrough they had witnessed. One morning, as the community gathered for their daily teaching session, a young monk named Upali approached Buddha with a question that clearly carried the weight of deep frustration. His face showed the strain of someone who had been pushing hard against an invisible barrier, seeking something that seemed to remain perpetually just beyond his grasp. "Blessed One," Upali said, bowing respectfully but unable to hide the disappointment in his voice. "I have been practicing meditation for 3 years now, following your teachings with complete dedication. I rise before dawn, sit in silent contemplation for hours each day, study the scriptures diligently, and observe every precept with careful attention. Yet I feel no closer to enlightenment than when I began this journey. I watch other monks who seem to progress so naturally, who speak of insights and experiences that remain foreign to me. I see disciples like Mahakasyapa receiving profound transmissions that I cannot even comprehend, let alone experience myself. Sometimes I wonder if I am simply not suited for this path, if perhaps I belong to those beings who are destined to struggle through countless lifetimes before finding awakening. Master, how long will it take for me to reach enlightenment? What am I doing wrong that prevents me from making the spiritual progress I long for? Please, if you have any guidance that might help me understand why this journey feels so difficult, I would be grateful to receive it." Buddha listened to Upali's heartfelt confession with the deep compassion of someone who understood intimately the spiritual impatience that can arise even in the most sincere seekers. He recognized in this young monk's questions the same restless seeking that he himself had experienced during his own years of searching before enlightenment. Rather than offering immediate reassurance or simple answers, Buddha settled back against the great tree under which they were gathered and spoke in the tone of someone about to share a story that contained medicine for a very specific form of spiritual suffering. "My dear Upali," he began, "let me tell you about another monk who once struggled with the very same questions that trouble you now. This monk lived in a small monastery, nestled high in the mountains, where the air was clear and the silence was so profound that it seemed to invite the deepest contemplation. Like you, he was earnest in his practice, rising each day with the sun to begin long hours of meditation, study, and spiritual exercise. Like you, he had heard stories of other practitioners who seemed to achieve remarkable insights with apparent ease, and he couldn't understand why his own progress felt so slow and uncertain. One day, his frustration reached such a peak that he decided to approach his master with a complaint very similar to the one you have just shared with me. "Teacher," he said, "I have been following this path for many years, yet I feel like I am walking in circles, getting nowhere. When will I finally achieve the enlightenment I seek? How much longer must I wait before I find what I am looking for?" The master listened carefully, then told his student a story that would change the entire direction of his understanding. "My son," the old teacher said, "let me tell you about a man who owned a beautiful ox, a magnificent animal that was his most treasured possession and his faithful companion in all of life's work. This ox was not just any ordinary animal, but one of extraordinary beauty and intelligence. Its hide was pure white as fresh snow. Its eyes held depths of wisdom that seemed almost human, and its presence brought peace to everyone who encountered it. The man and his ox were inseparable, working together each day in perfect harmony, sharing a bond that went far beyond the relationship between human and animal. But one morning, the man awoke to discover that his beloved ox had vanished during the night. Panic filled his heart as he searched the immediate area around his home, calling the animal's name and looking in every familiar place where it might have wandered. When this initial search proved fruitless, his concern grew into genuine alarm. Determined to find his precious companion, the man set out on what would become a long and difficult journey. Day after day, he traveled through unfamiliar territories, asking every person he met whether they had seen his lost ox. He searched through dense forests where sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, climbed steep mountain paths that left him exhausted and breathless, and crossed vast meadows that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. Weeks passed, and still there was no sign of the missing animal. The man's clothes became worn from constant travel. His feet grew sore from walking on rough terrain, and his heart began to heavy with the fear that he might never see his beloved ox again. Yet he persisted in his search, driven by the deep love he felt for his lost companion and the conviction that somewhere, somehow, they would be reunited. Then one day, as he was walking along a winding path through a particularly beautiful valley, something caught his attention. There, pressed clearly into the soft earth beside the trail was a hoofprint that looked unmistakably familiar. His heart leaped with excitement as he knelt to examine the mark more closely. Yes, there was no doubt, this was definitely a print left by his ox. Filled with renewed hope and energy, the man began following the trail of hoofprints with the dedication of a detective pursuing the most important case of his career. The tracks led him through winding mountain paths, across crystal-clear streams, and into hidden valleys he had never seen before. Sometimes the trail was easy to follow, with clear prints visible in muddy ground or soft sand. Other times it became difficult to trace, requiring him to search carefully among rocks and hard-packed earth for the faintest signs of his ox's passage. Days turned into weeks as he followed this trail with unwavering determination. Sometimes he would lose the tracks entirely and spend hours searching in widening circles until he found them again. Other times the path seemed to double back on itself, leading him through areas he was certain he had already explored. But gradually, the signs became fresher and more frequent. He began to find places where the ox had clearly rested, areas of flattened grass that still held the faint warmth of the animal's body. He discovered trees where the bark had been rubbed, water sources where hoofprints were accompanied by disturbed mud that indicated recent drinking. Then, one glorious morning as he crested a small hill, the man saw something that made his heart sing with joy. There in a peaceful meadow below, grazing contentedly among wildflowers that swayed in the gentle breeze, was his beloved ox. The animal looked healthy and serene, its white coat gleaming in the morning sunlight, appearing completely at home in this beautiful natural setting. Hardly daring to believe his eyes, the man approached slowly, speaking in the gentle tones his ox had always loved. The animal looked up at the sound of his voice, and their eyes met across the meadow. Instead of running away, the ox began walking toward him with the calm dignity that had always characterized their relationship. When they were finally reunited, the man threw his arms around the ox's neck and wept with relief and joy. But as he held his cherished companion, something remarkable began to dawn on him. The ox hadn't been lost at all. It had simply been living naturally and peacefully in its true home. All those weeks of frantic searching, all that anxiety and desperation, had been based on the mistaken belief that something was missing when nothing had actually been lost. Even more profound was the realization that through his long journey of searching, the man himself had been transformed. The process of following the tracks, of learning to read the subtle signs of his ox's presence, of developing the patience and persistence needed for such a quest, all of this had developed capacities within him that he had never possessed before. He was no longer the same person who had begun this search, and his relationship with his ox had deepened into something far more understanding and appreciative than it had ever been. As he led his ox home through familiar paths that now seemed fresh and beautiful in ways he had never noticed before, the man understood that the real treasure of his journey had not been finding what was lost, but discovering what had never been missing, the deep capacity for love, patience, and genuine appreciation that the search itself had awakened within his own heart. Buddha paused in his storytelling and looked directly at Upali, whose face had begun to show the dawning of new understanding. "Do you see, my dear student," Buddha said gently, "what this parable reveals about your own spiritual journey? The ox represents your true nature, your Buddha nature, which has never actually been lost or missing. It exists within you right now, as perfect and complete as it has always been. What you call lack of progress is actually the necessary journey of learning to recognize what has always been present. The tracks you follow are not leading you toward enlightenment. They are enlightenment itself, appearing in the form of each moment of mindful awareness, each act of compassion, each instant of genuine presence. The searching is not separate from the finding. The practice is not separate from the goal. Every step on the path is simultaneously the path and the destination. Your impatience comes from the belief that you must travel to some distant place to find what you seek. But the truth is that spiritual awakening is not about going anywhere or becoming someone different. It is about recognizing who and what you already are, and it is about developing the patience and wisdom to see clearly what has never been hidden. The profound teaching about the lost ox had clearly resonated with Upali and many of the other disciples who were beginning to see their spiritual journey in an entirely new light. But as Buddha observed their faces in the gentle afternoon light filtering through the monastery trees, he recognized that another crucial understanding was still needed. While they were beginning to grasp that enlightenment was not something distant to be achieved, many still struggled with a fundamental question about the spiritual path itself. If their true nature was already perfect, if Buddha nature was already present, then why did they need teachings at all? Why did Buddha himself offer so many different practices, meditation techniques, and methods if the goal was simply to recognize what was already there? A senior monk named Subhuti, whose years of practice had earned him deep respect among the community, voiced this question that was troubling many hearts. "Blessed One," he said with genuine perplexity, "your teaching about the ox has opened our understanding in profound ways. We begin to see that we are not seeking something absent, but recognizing something present. Yet this creates confusion about the role of all the methods you have given us. If our true nature is already perfect, why do we need the Eightfold Path? If enlightenment is not something to be attained but something to be recognized, why do you teach us meditation techniques, ethical guidelines, and countless practices? Are these teachings perhaps unnecessary, or even obstacles that distract us from the simple recognition you described?" Buddha smiled with the deep satisfaction of a teacher whose students were asking exactly the right questions. He recognized that they had reached a crucial juncture in their understanding, where apparent contradictions in the teachings needed to be resolved through a deeper wisdom that transcended simple either-or thinking. "My dear Subhuti," Buddha began, settling into the posture that indicated he was about to share another illuminating story, Let me answer your question with a parable that reveals why compassionate guidance sometimes requires what might seem like elaborate methods to achieve the simplest goals. In a prosperous village not far from here, there lived a wealthy merchant who had built a magnificent home for his family. This house was his pride and joy, 3 stories tall, with beautiful carved pillars, rooms filled with fine furniture and precious ornaments, and a garden that was the envy of everyone who saw it. But more precious to him than all these material treasures were his 3 young children, who brought light and laughter to every corner of their beautiful home. The merchant was a man devoted to his work, often traveling to distant cities to conduct business that would provide for his family's comfort and security. His children, aged between 5 and 10 years old, had grown accustomed to playing together during their father's frequent absences, finding endless entertainment in the many rooms and treasures their home contained. One autumn day, while the merchant was away, negotiating an important contract in a neighboring town, a terrible accident occurred. A cooking fire in the kitchen, left unattended by a careless servant, began to spread beyond its proper boundaries. The flames caught the wooden beams of the ceiling, then spread rapidly through the dry timber that formed the house's structure. Within minutes, what had begun as a small mishap had transformed into a raging inferno that consumed room after room with terrifying speed. The servants who discovered the fire immediately fled to safety, but in their panic, they forgot about the 3 children who were playing in an upstairs room, completely absorbed in their games and unaware of the deadly danger that was spreading beneath them. When the merchant returned from his business trip and saw smoke billowing from his home, his heart filled with a terror more profound than anything he had ever experienced. Racing toward the house, he could see through the windows that the ground floor was already engulfed in flames, while the staircase that led to the upper levels was beginning to catch fire as well. He shouted desperately toward the upstairs windows where he knew his children were playing. "Children, come down immediately. The house is on fire. You must leave now before it's too late." But his children, safely ensconced in their upstairs playroom, could not see the flames that threatened them. They heard their father's voice, but interpreted his urgent cries as perhaps some new kind of game or possibly an interruption of their current entertainment. They called back cheerfully, "We're having so much fun up here, Father. We're playing with our favorite toys. Can't we stay just a little longer?" The merchant's desperation grew as he watched the flames climbing higher, knowing that within minutes the fire would reach his children's room. He tried shouting more urgently about the danger, explaining in detail how the fire was spreading and why they needed to escape immediately. But the children, absorbed in their play and unable to see the threat for themselves, continued to treat their father's warnings as unnecessary interruptions to their enjoyment. Suddenly, the merchant remembered something that brought a flash of inspiration to his terrified mind. His children had been begging him for months to buy them each a toy cart, not just any ordinary toys, but 3 specific types they had seen in the village marketplace and talked about endlessly. The oldest wanted a goat-drawn cart The middle child dreamed of a deer-drawn cart, and the youngest had set her heart on an ox-drawn cart. "Children," the merchant called out with renewed urgency, "come down quickly. I have wonderful news. I've just returned from town with the most amazing surprise. I've brought those special carts you've been wanting. There's a goat cart, a deer cart, and an ox cart waiting for you right outside. But you must come down immediately to see them." This promise had an immediate and dramatic effect. The children's excited voices could be heard through the window as they abandoned their current games and rushed toward the stairs. Within moments, all three came running out of the burning house, their faces bright with anticipation and excitement about the promised treasures. As soon as they were safely away from the flames, the merchant swept them into his arms, his heart overflowing with relief and gratitude that they were unharmed. The children looked around eagerly for the carts he had promised, their eyes scanning the area in front of the house. "Father," the oldest child asked, "where are the carts you told us about? We don't see the goat cart or the deer cart or the ox cart you promised." The merchant, still trembling from the terror of nearly losing his children, looked at their innocent faces and made a decision that came straight from his heart. He had promised them 3 separate carts to entice them to safety, but now he realized he wanted to give them something far more wonderful than what he had originally described. The next day, he presented them with a single magnificent cart that surpassed anything they could have imagined. It was beautifully crafted from the finest woods, decorated with precious gems that sparkled in the sunlight, and large enough for all 3 children to ride together. Instead of being pulled by ordinary animals, it was drawn by a magnificent white ox whose beauty and gentleness made it seem almost magical. The children were absolutely delighted with this gift, which exceeded their original wishes in every possible way. They soon forgot entirely about the 3 separate carts they had initially wanted, finding far more joy in sharing this one extraordinary treasure than they ever could have found in individual toys. As the merchant watched his children playing happily with their new cart, safe from the fire that had completely destroyed their old home, he reflected on the strange wisdom of what had occurred. He had used the promise of lesser gifts to guide them away from danger toward a greater gift than they had ever imagined possible. Buddha paused in his storytelling and looked around at his disciples with eyes that sparkled with gentle humor and profound compassion. "Do you see, my dear students, what this parable reveals about the nature of spiritual teaching? The burning house represents samsara, this world of suffering, attachment, and endless cycling through birth and death. Most beings, like the children absorbed in their games, are so distracted by temporary pleasures and concerns that they cannot see the danger that surrounds them. They cannot perceive how their attachments to worldly things are actually the source of their suffering. I am like the father who sees the fire clearly and calls out warnings, but beings cannot understand the urgency of spiritual practice when described in abstract terms. So out of skillful compassion, I offer different teachings to different people according to what will motivate them to begin the journey away from suffering. To some, I promise the peace of concentration. To others, I describe the joy of loving kindness. To still others, I speak of the wisdom that comes from understanding emptiness. These are like the different carts I promise, each one designed to inspire specific individuals to take the steps that will lead them away from the burning house of samsara. But what I ultimately offer to all who complete the journey is far more wonderful than any of these preliminary promises. Complete liberation, perfect enlightenment, the end of all suffering, this surpasses every individual goal or partial achievement that might have initially motivated someone to begin practicing. The methods I teach are not obstacles to recognizing your true nature. They are skillful means for removing the obstacles that prevent you from seeing what was always there. Just as the Father's promise of carts was not deception but compassionate guidance towards safety, my teachings are not unnecessary complications, but loving support for your journey toward the recognition of your inherent freedom. The teaching about skillful means had provided the disciples with a profound new understanding of why Buddha offered so many different practices and approaches. Yet, as they reflected on the parable of the burning house, some began to wonder about the relationship between spiritual practice and the inevitable encounters with worldly pleasures that filled their daily lives. Even as dedicated monks, they still experienced moments of enjoyment, the taste of a particularly delicious meal offered by generous villagers, the beauty of a sunset that took their breath away, the warmth of companionship during community gatherings. If these pleasures were natural parts of human experience, how should they relate to them on the spiritual path? Should all enjoyment be viewed with suspicion, or was there a way to experience life's sweetness without falling into the trap of attachment? A thoughtful monk named Kakayana approached Buddha with this question that had been weighing on many hearts. "Master," he said respectfully, "your teaching about the burning house helps us understand why we need guidance away from the dangers of samsara. But this raises a question about how we should relate to the pleasures we encounter along the way. Should we view all enjoyment as dangerous distraction, or is there wisdom that allows us to experience beauty and pleasure without being trapped by them?" Buddha nodded approvingly at this nuanced question, recognizing that his students were developing the kind of sophisticated understanding that moved beyond simple rules toward genuine wisdom. "Kakayana," he replied, "your question touches on one of the most important skills for anyone walking the spiritual path. Let me share with you a story that illustrates both the dangers and the possibilities that exist in our relationship with worldly pleasures. Once upon a time, in a dense forest where ancient trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight reached the ground in only scattered golden beams, there lived a skilled hunter who had learned to capture wild animals using a method that was both clever and cruel. This hunter understood that most forest creatures possessed a natural wariness that made them difficult to approach directly, so he had developed a strategy that took advantage of their innocent desires. The hunter would venture deep into the forest, carrying a small clay pot filled with the most delicious honey, honey so pure and sweet that its fragrance could attract animals from great distances. But this honey contained a terrible secret. Into its golden sweetness, the hunter had mixed a deadly poison that would bring quick death to any creature that consumed even a small amount. Finding a well-traveled animal path near a stream where creatures came to drink, the hunter would carefully spread this poisoned honey on large leaves, then retreat to a hiding place where he could observe the results of his trap. The sweet aroma would drift through the forest air, drawing curious animals who had no way of detecting the danger hidden within something that smelled so appealing. One day, a beautiful deer wandered along this forest path, her graceful movements and alert eyes showing the natural wisdom that had kept her safe through many seasons. As she approached the stream for her daily drink, the incredible sweetness of the honey reached her sensitive nostrils. She had never encountered anything quite like this scent. It was far more enticing than any flower, nectar, or tree sap she had ever discovered. The deer paused, her instincts warning her to be cautious of anything unusual in her familiar territory. She circled the honey-covered leaves several times, testing the air for any signs of danger, listening carefully for sounds that might indicate the presence of predators. Everything seemed safe, and the alluring fragrance grew stronger with each breath. Finally, her desire overcame her caution. She approached the leaves and took a small, tentative taste of the honey. The sweetness that flooded her mouth was more delicious than anything she had ever experienced, richer than the nectar of spring flowers, more satisfying than the sweetest fruits of summer. For a brief moment, she felt a pleasure so intense it seemed to justify any risk. But within minutes of consuming the honey, the deer began to feel strange sensations coursing through her body. Her legs grew weak, her vision became blurred, and a terrible burning began to spread through her stomach. Too late, she realized that the very sweetness that had brought her such momentary joy was now bringing her death. She collapsed beside the stream, her life ending because she had been unable to resist what appeared to be pure pleasure, but contained hidden poison. As Buddha finished this part of the story, he looked around at his disciples with eyes full of compassion for all beings who must navigate the complex relationship between desire and wisdom. Now, my friends, he continued, you might think this story is a warning to avoid all pleasure, to reject every sweet experience that life offers. But that would be a misunderstanding of the deeper teaching contained within this parable. The honey itself was not evil. It was genuinely sweet and nourishing. The problem was not the pleasure, but the poison that had been mixed with it, and the deer's inability to distinguish between what was safe to enjoy and what was dangerous to consume. In our human lives, we encounter many experiences that offer genuine sweetness, the joy of friendship, the beauty of nature, the satisfaction of meaningful work, the pleasure of artistic expression. These experiences are not inherently poisonous. They become dangerous only when we approach them with the poison of attachment, when we demand that they provide permanent satisfaction, when we become so dependent on them that our peace depends on their continued presence. The wise practitioner learns to distinguish between pleasure and attachment, between enjoyment and craving. When you taste delicious food, you can appreciate its flavor fully without demanding that the pleasure last forever. When you witness a beautiful sunset, you can be moved by its splendor without trying to possess it or recreate it. When you experience friendship, you can cherish the connection without clinging so tightly that you destroy the very freedom that makes relationship possible. This discernment comes from mindfulness, the ability to observe your own responses to pleasant experiences. When pleasure arises, notice whether it is accompanied by grasping, by demands that it continue indefinitely, by anxiety about losing it. These are the signs that poison has been mixed with the honey. But when you can receive pleasure with gratitude while holding it lightly, when you can enjoy beauty without needing to own it, when you can appreciate sweetness without becoming addicted to it, then you have learned to extract the nourishment from life's honey while avoiding the poison of attachment. The goal of spiritual practice is not to eliminate all enjoyment from life, but to purify our relationship with enjoyment, so that pleasure becomes a gateway to appreciation rather than a trap that leads to suffering. This requires the development of what we call the middle way, neither grasping after every pleasure nor rejecting all beauty, but finding the balanced awareness that can receive life's gifts without being enslaved by them. Tonight, as you encounter whatever small pleasures arise, the comfort of your sleeping mat, the peaceful sounds of evening, the satisfaction of a day spent in meaningful practice, see if you can taste these experiences fully while remaining free from the poison of attachment. Let pleasure be what it naturally is, a temporary gift that enriches life without defining it, sweetness that can be appreciated without becoming a source of dependence or suffering. There was once a young man born into a peaceful village, given the name Ahimsa, which means the harmless one. His parents chose this name with deep hope that their child would live a life filled with gentleness, wisdom, and contribution to the world around him. And for many years, it seemed their hopes would be fulfilled in the most beautiful way possible. Ahimsa grew into everything his name promised, a kind-hearted, intelligent young man whose natural curiosity and sharp mind made him beloved by teachers and respected by fellow students. His dedication to learning was extraordinary, spending long hours studying ancient texts, mastering complex philosophical concepts, and developing the kind of deep understanding that marked him as someone destined for greatness. Word of Ahimsa's brilliance reached a renowned teacher who ran an exclusive school for the most promising young scholars in the region. This teacher, impressed by reports of the young man's abilities, invited Ahimsa to join his prestigious institution. It was an honor that families dreamed of, the opportunity to study with a master whose students often went on to become advisors to kings and respected philosophers in their own right. For several years, Ahimsa flourished in this advanced learning environment. His understanding surpassed that of students who had been there much longer. His insights impressed even the most experienced instructors, and his respectful manner earned him the admiration of everyone who encountered him. It seemed that his path toward becoming a great teacher and scholar was unfolding exactly as it should. But within the heart of his master, a darkness was growing that would prove catastrophic for this promising young man. As Ahimsa's abilities continued to shine ever more brightly, the teacher began to feel threatened rather than proud. Jealousy crept into his thoughts like poison, followed by fear that his own reputation might be overshadowed by this brilliant student. These toxic emotions festered until they transformed into a hatred so intense that the teacher decided to destroy the very person whose gifts had once brought him such satisfaction. Using his position of authority and the trust that people naturally placed in him, the teacher began spreading malicious lies about Ahimsa's character. He whispered to other instructors that the young man had been disrespectful in private, claimed that Ahimsa had been dishonest about his work, and even suggested that he had made threatening remarks toward fellow students. These fabricated accusations, coming from such a respected source, spread through the school community like flames through dry grass. Students who had once admired Ahimsa began to view him with suspicion. Teachers who had praised his dedication started to question his motives. The warm atmosphere of learning and fellowship that had nurtured his growth was replaced by cold stares, whispered conversations that stopped when he appeared, and an isolation that grew more complete with each passing day. Eventually, the lies achieved their intended purpose. Ahimsa was expelled from the school in disgrace, branded as dangerous and unworthy, cast out from the community that had once celebrated his promise. The young man who had devoted his life to truth and learning suddenly found himself rejected by the very world he had served so faithfully. The shock and betrayal of this experience shattered something fundamental in Ahimsa's heart. He wandered into the wilderness, consumed by a rage and despair unlike anything he had ever imagined possible. The injustice burned in his chest like acid, and the pain of being rejected by those he had trusted began to transform into something much darker and more dangerous. In his lost and broken state, Ahimsa encountered a group of bandits who saw in his bitterness and strength a potential recruit for their violent way of life. These men, who lived outside the boundaries of law and morality, welcomed him with the acceptance he had been denied by respectable society. They fed his anger with stories of how the world had wronged them all, how society deserved to suffer for its hypocrisy and cruelty. Gradually, through their influence and his own growing hatred, Ahimsa began to believe that the only way to respond to the injustice he had experienced was to become the very monster that society had falsely accused him of being. If the world insisted on seeing him as dangerous and evil, then perhaps he would give them exactly what they expected. The transformation from Ahimsa the scholar to what he would become was not immediate, but once it began, it progressed with terrifying speed. He adopted a new name that would strike fear into the hearts of everyone who heard it, Angulimala, which means garland of fingers, for he began the horrific practice of killing travelers and cutting off one finger from each victim to create a gruesome necklace that symbolized his complete rejection of human compassion. For months, Angulimala terrorized the countryside, becoming the most feared serial killer in the entire region. He would hide along forest paths and mountain roads, attacking lone travelers with a savagery that seemed to come from some place beyond human understanding. His string of fingers grew longer with each murder, and his reputation became so terrible that merchants refused to travel certain routes, and entire villages would lock their doors at sunset. By the time he had committed his 999th murder, Angulimala had become a figure of such terror that even the bravest warriors avoided the forests where he was known to hunt. He needed only one more finger to complete his grotesque garland of 1,000, and he had made a vow that once he reached this number, he would seek out and kill the teacher whose betrayal had started him on this path of destruction. It was at this moment that Buddha, aware of the terrible suffering this lost soul was both experiencing and causing, made the compassionate decision to enter the very forest where Angulimala was hunting. Despite urgent warnings from villagers and even his own disciples, Buddha walked alone into the dangerous wilderness, not out of ignorance of the risk, but from a profound understanding that sometimes the greatest love requires walking directly toward the greatest darkness. As Buddha moved peacefully along the forest path, enjoying the morning sunlight filtering through the leaves and the songs of birds who knew nothing of human violence, he became aware that he was being stalked. He could sense the presence of someone moving through the trees with the skill of a predator who had perfected the art of hunting human beings. When Angulimala finally emerged from his hiding place, the sight of him would have terrified most people into paralysis. He was a large, powerful man whose body showed the marks of living violently in the wilderness. His hair was wild and matted, his clothes were stained with blood, and around his neck hung the horrific necklace of 999 human fingers, evidence of brutality that seemed to place him beyond any possibility of redemption. But Buddha saw something that others had missed entirely. Beneath all the rage and violence, he could perceive the remnants of the gentle scholar Angulimala had once been, and more importantly, he could see the Buddha nature that remained perfectly intact, despite everything this man had done. This recognition filled Buddha's heart not with fear, but with infinite compassion for the suffering that had driven Angulimala to such extremes. Angulimala began running toward Buddha with his weapon raised, clearly intending to make him his 1,000th victim. But as he ran, something extraordinary began to happen that challenged everything he thought he understood about reality. Though Buddha continued walking at his normal, peaceful pace, Angulimala found himself unable to close the distance between them. No matter how fast he ran, no matter how much effort he exerted, Buddha remained just beyond his reach, walking calmly ahead, as if the very laws of space and time were bending to protect compassion from violence. This continued until finally Angulimala stopped in complete exhaustion and bewilderment. Breathing heavily, sweat pouring down his face, he called out in frustration that carried within it the first crack in the armor of hatred he had built around his heart. "Stop, monk," he shouted. "Stop running. Why can't I catch you?" Buddha turned to face him then, and in that moment, he spoke words that would change everything. "Angulimala," he said with infinite gentleness, "I have stopped. It is you who are still running." These words hit Angulimala with the force of lightning, illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness for years. In that instant, he understood that Buddha was not speaking about physical movement, but about the deeper truth of existence itself. Buddha had stopped running from life, stopped running from pain, stopped running from the truth of what it means to be human. But Angulimala had been running for so long, running from the pain of betrayal, running from his own capacity for goodness, running from the possibility of peace, that he had forgotten what it felt like to be still. The weapon fell from his hands as the full weight of this realization penetrated his consciousness. For the first time since his transformation from scholar to killer, Angulimala saw himself clearly, not as the monster he had convinced himself he needed to be, but as a human being who had been running from his own heart for so long that he had forgotten the way home. He collapsed to his knees before Buddha, and when he looked up, the eyes that had held nothing but rage and violence now overflowed with tears of recognition and remorse. "Master," he whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of countless unspoken sorrows, "is it possible for someone like me to find peace? Can someone who has done what I have done ever be forgiven? Is there any hope for a heart that has chosen darkness for so long?" Buddha knelt beside him and placed his hand gently on Angulimala's shoulder, meeting his gaze with the unconditional love that he offered to all beings, regardless of their past actions. "My dear friend," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had seen into the deepest truths of existence, "there is no darkness so deep that the light of awakening cannot penetrate it. There is no past so terrible that it cannot be transformed by the power of genuine remorse and sincere commitment to change. The Buddha nature within you has never been touched by any of your actions. It has been waiting patiently all this time for you to stop running and recognize its presence. Today, if you are willing, your real life can begin." That day, Angulimala took refuge in the 3 jewels and became Buddha's disciple. The transformation that followed was so complete and genuine that within a relatively short time, through dedicated practice and the grace of awakened understanding, he attained the state of an arhat, achieving the same level of enlightenment as Buddha's most advanced students. But the path was not easy for him. When they returned to populated areas, people recognized him as the notorious serial killer, and their fear and hatred followed him wherever he went. Stones were thrown at him, curses shouted in his direction, and many demanded that he be executed for his crimes. Yet through all of this, Angulimala remained peaceful and accepting, understanding that these reactions were the natural consequences of his past actions. One day, he approached Buddha, troubled by the continued hostility he faced. "Master," he said, "I have genuinely changed my heart and devoted my life to the path of peace. Yet people still treat me as if I were the same person who committed those terrible acts. How should I understand this continuing rejection?" Buddha shared with him a profound truth about karma and the nature of transformation. "Angulimala," he said, "when someone throws a stone at you and you do not pick it up, whose stone is it? It belongs to the person who threw it. Similarly, when people offer you their anger and hatred, if you do not accept these emotions into your own heart, they remain with those who are offering them. Your transformation is complete and genuine, but others may need time to recognize this change. Some may never be able to see past your former actions to the enlightened being you have become. This is their burden to carry, not yours. Your responsibility is simply to continue living from the truth of what you are now, not from the shadow of what you once were. Angulimala lived out his remaining years as a model of compassion and wisdom, helping many other people find their way to peace. His story became legendary, not as an example of human evil, but as proof of the infinite capacity for transformation that exists within every being. This powerful account reminds us that no matter how far anyone has fallen, no matter how impossible change might seem, the potential for awakening remains intact within every heart. It teaches us that the love which leads to enlightenment knows no boundaries, recognizes no limitations, and never stops believing in the possibility of complete transformation. In every human being, regardless of their past actions, the light of Buddha nature continues to shine, waiting patiently for the moment when they are ready to stop running and come home to their true self. Tonight, as you rest, let this story remind you that redemption is always possible, that love is stronger than hatred, and that within your own heart lies the same infinite potential for awakening that transformed a serial killer into an enlightened sage. In a remote forest monastery, nestled high among mist-covered peaks, there lived a monk whose dedication to spiritual practice had become legendary throughout the surrounding villages. His name was Kassapa, and he had earned a reputation for the most rigorous and extreme forms of ascetic discipline that anyone had ever witnessed. Kassapa believed with absolute conviction that the path to enlightenment required the complete mortification of the body and the total denial of all physical desires. He had studied the accounts of great sages who had achieved profound realizations through severe austerities, and he was determined to surpass them all in his commitment to self-discipline. In his mind, every comfort accepted, every pleasure experienced, every moment of physical ease was a step away from the liberation he sought so desperately. His daily routine was punishing in its severity. He would rise hours before dawn to begin meditation practices that continued with barely any breaks throughout the entire day. But most extreme of all was his approach to food. Kassapa would fast for days at a time, believing that by denying his body nourishment, he was purifying his spirit and demonstrating his complete detachment from worldly concerns. These extended fasts were not occasional practices, but a regular part of his spiritual discipline. He would go 3 days eating nothing, then perhaps accept a single handful of rice before beginning another fast that might last even longer. His body had become painfully thin, his ribs clearly visible beneath skin that had taken on a greyish pallor, and his movements had slowed to those of someone much older than his actual years. Yet Kassapa wore his physical deterioration like a badge of honor. Each day that he successfully resisted the body's demands for food felt like a victory over the material world, a step closer to the complete transcendence he believed was necessary for awakening. When other monks expressed concern about his health, he would respond that their worry showed they were still attached to the illusions of bodily existence. The other residents of the monastery watched Kassapa's extreme practices with a mixture of admiration and concern. Some genuinely respected his unwavering commitment and wondered if perhaps they were not dedicated enough to their own spiritual development. Others worried that he was harming himself in ways that might actually impede rather than advance his spiritual progress, but none felt qualified to challenge someone whose reputation for holiness had spread so widely. One morning, as Kassapa sat in meditation near the entrance to the monastery, a young village boy happened to pass by on his way to gather herbs for his family. The child, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, stopped in his tracks when he saw the monk's dramatically weakened condition. Unlike the adults, who had grown accustomed to Kassapa's appearance, the boy's innocent eyes saw immediately that something was terribly wrong. The child approached the monk with the natural compassion that often flows more freely from young hearts than from those that have been hardened by too much thinking about spiritual matters. "Sir," the boy said with genuine concern in his voice, "you look very sick and tired. When did you last eat something? Are you hungry?" Kassapa opened his eyes and looked at the child with surprise. He was not accustomed to being questioned about his practices, especially by someone so young. "I am fasting to purify my spirit and achieve liberation from all worldly attachments," he replied with the tone of someone explaining something obvious to someone who couldn't possibly understand. Food is a distraction from the spiritual path. By denying my body's desires, I am freeing my soul from the prison of material existence. The boy listened to this explanation with the kind of puzzled expression that children wear when adults say things that don't make sense to their practical minds. He looked down at the small bundle of food he was carrying, simple fare that his mother had prepared for his day of herb gathering. Without hesitation, he unwrapped a portion of flatbread and some dried fruit and held it out to Kassapa. "Please take this," the boy said with the matter-of-fact kindness that comes naturally to those who haven't yet learned to complicate simple acts of care. "My mother always packs more than I need, and you look like you need it much more than I do. It's not very much, but it might help you feel stronger." Kassapa stared at the offered food, his mind immediately engaged in an intense internal struggle. His rigorous discipline demanded that he refuse this offering, that he maintain his fast as a demonstration of his commitment to transcending bodily needs. But something about the child's genuine concern, the pure motivation behind the gift, and the simple humanity of the moment began to crack through the rigid walls he had built around his heart. For the first time in months, Kassapa really looked at the person standing before him, instead of seeing him merely as a test of his spiritual resolve. He saw the boy's bright eyes full of natural compassion, the way he held the food with both eagerness to help and patience to wait for a response. In that moment, Kassapa began to realize that in his single-minded pursuit of personal liberation, he had lost touch with something essential, the capacity to receive and respond to the love that others offered. Almost without conscious decision, Kassapa found himself reaching out to accept the boy's gift. As he took the simple food in his trembling hands, he felt something shift inside his chest, a warmth he hadn't experienced in years, a recognition that spiritual practice might involve more than just the endless denial of human connection. As he ate the bread and fruit, the first food he had tasted in 4 days, Kassapa felt not just the return of physical strength, but something far more profound. He realized that in his determination to transcend the world, he had actually withdrawn from the very relationships through which enlightenment might naturally unfold. He had been so focused on his own purification that he had forgotten something fundamental about the spiritual path. The boy watched with satisfaction as some color returned to Kassapa's pale cheeks, then continued on his way with the simple joy of someone who had helped another person without needing any recognition or reward. But for Kassapa, this brief encounter had initiated a profound transformation in his understanding that left him both grateful and deeply confused. Over the following days, Kassapa found himself reflecting on what had occurred, but he knew he needed guidance to understand this shift in his perspective. He had heard that Buddha was teaching at a grove not far from the monastery, and he decided to seek the wisdom of the enlightened master who was known for his deep understanding of the spiritual path. When Kassapa found Buddha, surrounded by disciples beneath a great banyan tree, he approached with the humility of someone whose certainties had been shaken in the most necessary way. He prostrated himself before the teacher and shared his story, his years of extreme fasting, the encounter with the village boy, and the confusion this had created about everything he thought he understood about spiritual practice. "Blessed One," Kassapa said, his voice carrying both respect and vulnerability, "I have devoted years to the strictest discipline, believing that by denying my body all comfort, I was purifying my spirit. But a young boy's simple act of kindness has made me question everything. When I accepted his food, I felt something awaken in my heart that years of fasting had never achieved. Have I been practicing wrongly all this time? What is the true relationship between discipline and compassion on the path to enlightenment?" Buddha listened with the gentle attention he gave to all sincere seekers, his eyes reflecting both understanding and compassion for this monk's genuine struggle. When Kassapa finished speaking, Buddha smiled with the warmth of someone who had seen many students discover this same crucial understanding. "My dear Kassapa," Buddha began, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had walked every aspect of the spiritual path. "Just as a bird needs 2 wings to fly, so does a seeker of truth need both wisdom and compassion. Discipline without compassion leads to rigidity and spiritual pride. Compassion without discipline can lead to indulgence and lack of focus. But when these 2 qualities are balanced and integrated, they become the very foundation of enlightenment itself. Your years of practice were not wasted, but they were incomplete. True spiritual development requires both the inner work of purification and the outer expression of love. That child became your teacher because he showed you what your heart already knew, but your mind had forgotten that awakening flourishes when we remain open to both giving and receiving, the natural flow of human kindness. Extreme austerity can be a useful tool for developing self-discipline, but it becomes an obstacle when it hardens the heart against the very connections that allow wisdom to flower into compassion. The middle path I teach is not about finding a compromise between extremes, but about discovering the dynamic balance where discipline serves love and compassion is guided by wisdom. Continue your meditation practice, maintain your ethical conduct, but do so with an open heart that can receive the gifts others offer and respond with your own gifts of understanding and care. When you practice this way, you will discover that spiritual progress accelerates because you are working with the natural flow of existence rather than against it. From that day forward, Kassapa returned to his monastery with a completely transformed understanding of the spiritual path. He continued to maintain discipline in his meditation and daily routine, but he also opened his heart to the community around him, finding that when wisdom and compassion were integrated, his practice deepened in ways he had never imagined possible. Years later, when Kassapa had become known not for his extreme fasting, but for the balanced wisdom and genuine kindness that radiated from his being, he would often think of that village boy whose simple act of compassion had opened the door to Buddha's profound teaching about the two wings of awakening. He understood then that the spiritual path is not about escaping from human connection, but about engaging with life from a place of greater wisdom and love, where discipline and compassion dance together in perfect harmony. One day, Buddha was sitting peacefully with his disciples when they were approached by a group of monks who appeared troubled. Among them walked a young brother whose face showed the unmistakable signs of someone who had given up on something important, his shoulders sagging with disappointment and his eyes avoiding direct contact with his teacher. The senior monks bowed respectfully before Buddha, then gently urged their struggling companion forward. "Master," one of them said with concern, "this brother took a sacred vow to remain in solitary meditation until he achieved a breakthrough in his practice, but after only a few weeks, he has abandoned his commitment and returned to the community. We fear his lack of perseverance may discourage other students." Buddha looked at the young monk with compassion rather than judgment. "Is this true, my friend?" Buddha asked gently. "Have you given up on the commitment you made to your practice?" The young monk nodded miserably. "Yes, master," he replied, his voice heavy with shame. "I believed I had the strength to achieve enlightenment through intensive practice, but I found myself overwhelmed by doubt and a sense that I was making no progress. I began to feel that perhaps I am not suited for the spiritual path, that maybe I lack some essential quality necessary for awakening." Buddha listened with deep understanding, then settled back against the tree, with the demeanor of someone about to share exactly the medicine this discouraged monk needed. "My dear friend," Buddha began, "this present life is a precious opportunity that should not be wasted. If you give up now, you may spend countless future existences regretting this moment when liberation was within your reach. But tell me, how is it that you have proved so irresolute in this lifetime, when in former existences you demonstrated unwavering determination that saved hundreds of lives. Let me remind you of who you truly are. The discouraged monk looked puzzled but settled in to listen, hoping this teaching might help him understand something important about his struggles. Buddha's voice took on the timeless quality that marked his most profound stories. Once upon a time, when Brahmadatta was reigning in Kasi, the Bodhisattva was born into a merchant family and became a trader who led caravans of 500 carts. This merchant, who was you in that previous lifetime, had earned a reputation for wisdom and the kind of steady courage that made others eager to join his expeditions. One season, his caravan decided to cross a vast sandy desert that stretched for many leagues, a journey both profitable and extremely dangerous. The sand was so fine it couldn't be held in a closed fist, and after sunrise it became hot as burning embers, making daytime travel impossible. Desert travelers had developed a specific method for safe crossing. They loaded extra supplies of wood, water, and food, then traveled only at night. At daybreak, they would camp under awnings, spending the day in shade until sunset when they could continue. This travel was like navigating an ocean, requiring skilled pilots who could guide caravans by reading the stars. Our caravan had successfully crossed 59 leagues of treacherous desert and was just one night away from safety. That evening, after their meal, the merchant ordered the final stage of their journey to begin. The pilot arranged cushions in the lead cart and lay down to observe the stars while directing the drivers. But exhausted from weeks of dangerous travel, he fell asleep on duty. Unguided, the oxen gradually turned around and began retracing their previous night's path. They walked steadily all night, but instead of progressing toward their destination, they moved backward through territory already crossed. When dawn came and the pilot awakened, he realized with horror what had happened. "Stop the wagons! Stop the wagons!" he called out in panic. As the caravan halted, despair spread like wildfire. They found themselves at the same campsite they had left the previous evening, having wasted precious supplies without making progress. Men cried out in anguish, "This is the very camp we left yesterday. We traveled all night only to return where we started. Our water is nearly gone, our food running low, and we're still deep in this merciless desert. We are lost and doomed to die." They unyoked their oxen and spread canopies, but instead of resting, the entire caravan lay down in complete despair. Many had given up hope, convinced that death in the desert was inevitable. But the Bodhisattva refused to surrender. "If I lose heart," he said to himself, "all these people will perish. As their leader, I have a responsibility beyond my own fears. There must be a way to find water, and I must discover it before it's too late." While the morning was still cool, he began walking around the campsite, carefully observing the landscape that others had dismissed as hopeless. His attention was caught by a small tuft of grass growing in apparently dry sand. This grass could only grow if there were water beneath the surface, he reasoned. If I can find that source, we might yet survive. He called for men to bring spades and dig where the grass grew. They dug steadily, 10 cubits, 20, 40, going deeper without finding moisture. At 60 cubits deep, their spades struck solid rock that seemed to block further progress. When the diggers hit this barrier, they threw down their tools in defeat. "It's hopeless," they declared. "There's nothing but rock beneath us." But the Bodhisattva wasn't ready to accept defeat. Something in his intuition told him water might exist below this obstacle. He descended into the pit and knelt on the stone, pressing his ear against its surface with total concentration. There, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of water flowing beneath, the gentle gurgling of an underground stream waiting to be discovered. When he climbed out, his face was bright with renewed hope. He called to his young assistant, "My friend, if we give up now, we shall all perish. But I have heard water flowing beneath that rock. Do not lose heart. Take this iron hammer, go down into the pit, and strike that stone with all your strength." The young man, inspired by his leader's unwavering confidence, obeyed without hesitation. Though everyone else stood in despair, he descended with determination and struck the rock with a mighty blow. The stone split in two and fell away. Immediately, clear, cool water began rising until the pit was filled to the depth of a palm tree's height. The entire caravan erupted in celebration as they realized their persevering leader had saved them from certain death. They drank deeply, bathed, cooked their rice, and watered their oxen. When sunset came, they placed a flag beside the well for future travelers, then continued safely to their destination, selling their goods at great profit before returning home. Buddha paused and looked directly at the discouraged monk, whose face now showed dawning recognition. "You see, my dear friend," Buddha concluded, "in that lifetime you were the merchant leader whose determination saved 500 people from death. You had courage to keep searching when others gave up, wisdom to recognize signs others missed, and faith to believe in possibilities others couldn't see. That same strength, persistence, and capacity for breakthrough exists within you right now. The only difference is that you have temporarily forgotten who you truly are. Just as you found water beneath rock when everyone believed it hopeless, you can find the enlightenment you seek if you refuse to give up. Remember, in spiritual development, as in desert survival, breakthrough often comes when the situation seems most hopeless. Those who persevere through the darkest moments of doubt discover the hidden springs of wisdom that lie beneath ordinary consciousness. The young monk bowed deeply, his heart now filled with renewed determination and profound understanding of his own capacity for spiritual achievement. From that day forward, he returned to practice with unshakable conviction that enlightenment was not only possible, but inevitable for those who refuse to surrender their commitment to awakening. In a prosperous village surrounded by fertile fields and bustling marketplaces, there lived a wealthy merchant whose success in business had brought him everything that most people dream of possessing. His name was Dhananjaya, and his vast fortune had been accumulated through years of shrewd trading, careful investments, and an almost supernatural ability to recognize profitable opportunities that others overlooked. Dhananjaya owned multiple grand houses in different cities, each one filled with the finest furniture, precious artwork, and luxurious amenities that money could buy. His storehouses overflowed with grain, gold, and trade goods from distant lands. His stables housed the most beautiful horses, his gardens bloomed with rare flowers, and his table was always laden with delicacies that would make a king envious. By every external measure, Dhananjaya had achieved what society considers ultimate success. Merchants from other regions spoke his name with respect and envy. Young entrepreneurs studied his methods, and his family enjoyed a status that opened every door. Yet, despite all these advantages, something fundamental was missing from his life. Deep within his heart, beneath all the material abundance, Dhananjaya carried a persistent sense of emptiness that no amount of wealth seemed able to fill. He would lie awake at night in his silk-covered bed, staring at the ceiling of his luxurious bedroom, wondering why he felt so restless and dissatisfied, despite having more than most people could imagine. The more successful he became, the more intense this inner emptiness grew. Each new acquisition would bring a brief moment of excitement, followed by the familiar return of that gnawing sense that something essential was still missing. He began to worry that perhaps some fundamental flaw in his character prevented him from experiencing the contentment his wealth should have provided. News eventually reached Dhananjaya that Buddha, the great awakened teacher, had come to their region and was offering guidance to all who sought wisdom. Stories of Buddha's profound understanding of the human heart and his ability to help people find lasting peace had spread throughout the land, attracting seekers from many distant places. Driven by a desperation that had been growing stronger with each passing month, Dhananjaya decided to approach this enlightened master, hoping that where his wealth had failed, spiritual wisdom might succeed in bringing him the contentment that had proved so elusive. He dressed in his finest robes, mounted his most magnificent horse, and set out for the grove where Buddha was teaching. When he arrived, Dhananjaya found Buddha sitting peacefully beneath a large banyan tree, surrounded by an atmosphere of such profound tranquility that it seemed to emanate from his very being. Buddha's simple orange robes and basic possessions stood in stark contrast to Dhananjaya's elaborate clothing and obvious wealth. Yet there was something about the teacher's presence that immediately commanded the deepest respect. Dhananjaya dismounted and approached with the mixture of humility and urgency that characterizes someone who has exhausted all other options. He prostrated himself before Buddha and then sat respectfully at a proper distance. "Blessed One," Dhananjaya began, his voice carrying the weight of years of accumulated frustration, "I have come to you because I am deeply troubled by a problem that seems to have no solution. I possess everything that people say should bring happiness, more wealth than I could spend in several lifetimes, beautiful homes, faithful servants, respect in my community, and a family that wants for nothing. Yet despite all these blessings, I feel empty inside, as if some essential ingredient for contentment is missing from my life. I have tried acquiring more possessions, expanding my business ventures, and increasing my social status, but nothing seems to fill this void that grows larger rather than smaller with each passing year. Please, if you have any wisdom that might help me find the happiness that seems to elude me despite all my advantages, I would be eternally grateful. Buddha listened to Dhananjaya's confession with the kind of complete attention that made the wealthy man feel truly heard for the first time in years. When Dhananjaya finished speaking, Buddha remained silent for several moments, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that seemed to see directly into the heart of the problem. "My friend," Buddha said finally, his voice carrying the gentle authority of someone who had seen deeply into the nature of human suffering, "I can see that your search for happiness has been sincere, even if it has been misdirected. What I am about to offer you is very powerful medicine for the kind of emptiness you describe, but it must be approached with complete faith and willingness to follow my guidance exactly. I will grant you 3 wishes, but these will not be ordinary wishes for more wealth or worldly success. These are spiritual wishes designed to address the root causes of your dissatisfaction. Are you prepared to trust my wisdom completely, even if what I prescribe seems different from what you might expect?" Dhananjaya's heart leaped with hope at this unexpected offer. "Yes, Blessed One," he replied eagerly. "I will follow your instructions precisely, no matter how unusual they might seem." Buddha nodded with compassionate approval. "Very well. For your first wish, I grant you complete freedom from all worries and troubles that disturb your peace. Go home and observe your mind carefully over the next few days, then return to tell me what you have discovered." Dhananjaya returned to his luxurious home feeling more optimistic than he had in months, convinced that his problems were finally going to be solved. But to his surprise and disappointment, he found that his mind continued to produce the same streams of worried thoughts as before. Concerns about business decisions, anxiety about his family's future, and fears about potential losses continued to arise with the same frequency and intensity that had always plagued him. After several days of careful observation, he realized that Buddha's first wish had not eliminated his worries at all. Frustrated and confused, he returned to the teacher. "Blessed One," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "your first wish does not seem to have worked. I still find myself worried about the same things that have always troubled me." Buddha smiled with patient understanding, like a wise parent watching a child learn an important lesson. "Worries do not disappear simply because you wish them away," he explained gently. "True freedom from worry comes from understanding the nature of your own mind and learning to relate differently to the thoughts that arise within it." Worries are like clouds that pass through the sky of consciousness. They come and go naturally when you stop grasping at them. For your second wish, I grant you complete freedom from all desires that create restlessness in your heart. Return home, observe your experience carefully, and come back to share what you learn. Again, Dhananjaya went home with high expectations, but again he found that the wish seemed to have no effect. His desires for more wealth, greater success, and increased status continued to arise as strongly as ever. The restless craving that had driven him to accumulate so much wealth remained as active as it had always been, pulling his attention toward new acquisitions and achievements. When he returned to report this second failure, Buddha received his disappointment with the same compassionate patience. Desires, like worries, are not eliminated through wishing or force, the teacher explained with infinite kindness. They arise from deeper patterns of thinking and feeling that must be understood and transformed through wisdom rather than simply suppressed through willpower. You have one wish remaining. Think carefully about what you would like to ask for, because this final wish holds the key to everything you truly seek. Dhananjaya sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes, reflecting deeply on his experiences with the first two wishes. Gradually, he began to realize that his approach had been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. He had been trying to solve his inner problems by changing external circumstances, just as he had always done with business challenges, but the emptiness he felt was clearly not something that could be fixed from the outside. "Blessed One," he said finally, his voice now carrying a humility that had been completely absent before. "For my third and final wish, I ask not for the removal of any external condition or the addition of any new experience. Instead, I wish for the ability to understand myself clearly, to see why I remain dissatisfied despite having everything I thought I wanted, and to discover what true contentment actually requires." Buddha's face brightened with deep satisfaction and obvious delight, like a teacher whose student has finally grasped the most important lesson. "Now you have made a truly wise wish," he said warmly, his eyes sparkling with approval. "This is the one request that can actually be fulfilled, because it seeks understanding rather than escape, wisdom rather than avoidance. Come, sit with me regularly over the coming weeks, and I will guide you in the practices of self-reflection and meditation that will reveal the source of your lifelong dissatisfaction." Over the following month, Buddha patiently taught Dhananjaya how to observe his own mind with clarity and compassion. Through daily meditation and careful self-examination, the wealthy merchant gradually began to see that his restlessness had never been caused by lacking enough possessions, but by his fundamental misunderstanding of where happiness actually comes from. He discovered that he had been seeking in external objects what could only be found through inner development. His wealth had not brought contentment because no amount of external acquisition can fill the emptiness that comes from not knowing one's true nature. Happiness, Buddha showed him, is not something to be achieved through accumulating experiences or possessions, but something to be uncovered by understanding and accepting the peace that already exists within. As this understanding deepened through Buddha's patient guidance, Dhananjaya found that his relationship with his wealth transformed completely. He still enjoyed comfort and beauty, but he no longer depended on them for his sense of well-being. He continued to manage his business affairs successfully, but without the desperate craving that had previously driven all his activities. "You see, my friend," Buddha explained, as Dhananjaya's transformation became complete, "true wealth lies not in what we possess externally, but in our capacity to appreciate what we already have internally and to find contentment independent of changing circumstances. When you understand your own mind clearly, you discover that you already possess everything necessary for genuine happiness, not because you have acquired it, but because you have learned to recognize what was always there." From that day forward, Dhananjaya lived with the profound peace that comes from self-understanding, grateful to Buddha for showing him that the greatest treasure is not gold or jewels, but the wisdom of knowing one's own heart. In a peaceful river that flowed through a dense forest, where ancient trees created a canopy so thick that sunlight reached the water in scattered golden beams, there lived a beautiful golden fish whose radiant scales caught the light like captured sunshine. This remarkable creature had become legendary among all the forest inhabitants. Birds would gather along the riverbank to watch it swim. Woodland animals would come to drink at spots where they might glimpse its graceful movements, and even the humans from nearby villages spoke of it with wonder and reverence. The golden fish embodied everything that represents true freedom in the natural world. It moved through the clear water with an elegance that seemed almost supernatural, its scales shifting from deep amber to brilliant gold as it caught different angles of filtered sunlight. Unlike the other fish in the river, this creature possessed an awareness and dignity that made every other being who encountered it feel they were in the presence of something sacred. There lived near this forest a fisherman named Matsya, a hard-working man who supported his family by catching fish from the river's abundant waters. He was known throughout his village as someone skilled with nets and patient with the rhythms of aquatic life, able to provide enough fish to feed his own family, while also selling surplus catch in the local market. But Matsya had recently fallen on difficult times. His usual fishing spots had yielded smaller catches, his nets needed repair, and his family's needs seemed to grow while his income diminished. For months, Matsya had heard other fishermen speaking in hushed, excited tones about the legendary golden fish, describing its beauty and speculating about the incredible price such a rare creature might command if sold to wealthy collectors or even to the king himself. As his financial worries deepened, Matsya found himself increasingly obsessed with the idea of capturing this magnificent fish, convinced that its sale would solve all his problems and provide security for his family's future. One morning, driven by desperation and dreams of wealth, Matsya set out before dawn with his finest net, determined to catch the golden fish that had become the object of all his hopes. He had studied the creature's habits, learned the places where it was most often seen, and prepared his equipment with the care of someone whose entire future depended on the success of this single endeavor. After casting his net numerous times without success, Matsya finally felt the unmistakable pull of something significant caught in his mesh. His heart pounded with excitement as he began to draw in the net, hardly daring to believe that his patience might finally be rewarded. When he pulled the net from the water, his breath caught in amazement. There, thrashing desperately against the confining mesh, was the golden fish itself. The creature was even more beautiful than the stories had described. Its scales seemed to contain their own inner light, and its eyes held an intelligence and awareness that immediately made Matsya feel uncomfortable about what he was planning to do. For a moment, he hesitated, struck by the fish's obvious distress and the way it seemed to be looking directly at him with what appeared to be a plea for mercy. But Matsya's financial desperation quickly overcame his momentary compassion. He placed the golden fish carefully in a large pot filled with river water, already calculating in his mind the fortune he would receive when he presented this prize to the king. He had heard that the royal court paid enormous sums for rare and beautiful creatures, and this fish was certainly the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. As Matsya was preparing to carry his precious catch to the palace, he became aware of a group of monks walking along the forest path. Among them was a figure whose presence seemed to radiate the same kind of peaceful dignity that Matsya had noticed in the golden fish itself, though he did not immediately recognize that this was Buddha, the awakened teacher whose compassion extended to all living beings. Buddha had been walking in meditation through the forest when his attention was drawn to the commotion by the river. With the heightened awareness that comes from deep spiritual development, he immediately understood the situation, the distress of the trapped fish, the fisherman's excited plans, and the moral choice that hung in the balance of this moment. Approaching Matsya with the gentle manner that characterized all his interactions, Buddha looked first at the golden fish swimming frantically in its small prison, then at the fisherman's face, which showed both triumph and an underlying unease that suggested his conscience was not entirely comfortable with what he was doing. "Good fisherman," Buddha said with genuine curiosity and kindness, "I see you have made quite an unusual catch today. What are your plans for this beautiful creature?" Matsya, pleased to have an audience for his achievement, explained eagerly how he had finally succeeded in capturing the legendary golden fish and how he planned to sell it to the king for what he was certain would be an enormous sum. "This fish will solve all my financial problems," he said with satisfaction. "My family will be secure, and I will finally have the wealth I need to live without constant worry." Buddha listened carefully, then looked again at the golden fish, whose distress was evident in every movement. "My friend," he said gently, "I can see that this fish, like all living creatures, wishes above all to be free. Its life belongs to itself, not to us. Consider this. What if, instead of selling this creature, you were to release it back to its natural home? In doing so, you might receive a reward far greater than any material payment." Matsya looked at Buddha with puzzlement and some irritation. "Respected sir, with all due respect, what reward could possibly be greater than the gold this fish will bring me?" I have struggled for months to provide for my family, and this catch represents the answer to all my prayers. How could letting it go possibly benefit me more than selling it? Buddha smiled with the infinite patience of someone who understood both the fisherman's immediate concerns and the deeper truths that would ultimately bring him greater happiness. When you release this fish, Buddha explained, you free yourself from something far more confining than any financial difficulty. You liberate yourself from the prison of greed and attachment that keeps your heart in constant turmoil. True wealth is not measured in gold or possessions, but in the peace of mind that comes from acting with compassion toward all living beings. The blessings that flow from such actions are not always immediate or obvious, but they bring a richness to life that no amount of money can purchase. There is more to existence than material gain. There is the joy that comes from knowing you have chosen kindness over cruelty, freedom over captivity. Something in Buddha's words and presence began to work a change in Matsya's heart. Looking again at the golden fish, he found himself really seeing its distress for the first time, recognizing its desperate desire for freedom, and feeling genuine empathy for another living being's suffering. The excitement he had felt about his potential profit began to be replaced by an uncomfortable awareness of what his gain would cost this beautiful creature. After several minutes of internal struggle, Matsya made a decision that surprised even himself. "You are right, honored teacher," he said quietly, lifting the pot that contained the golden fish. "This creature deserves its freedom more than I deserve its value." He walked to the edge of the river and gently poured the contents of the pot back into the flowing water. The golden fish paused for a moment, as if understanding what had just occurred, then began to swim in joyful circles, its scales catching the sunlight and creating ripples of light that seemed to dance across the entire surface of the river. Buddha watched this transformation with deep satisfaction. "See how the fish expresses its gratitude through pure joy," he observed. "When we release our attachments and choose compassion over greed, we too experience this same kind of freedom, and our hearts become as light as this creature's movements." As Matsya walked home, he felt something he had not experienced in months, a profound sense of peace that seemed to emanate from the very center of his being. He had chosen compassion over profit, and while he could not yet see how this decision would affect his material circumstances, he knew with absolute certainty that he had made the right choice. In the years that followed, Matsya discovered that Buddha's promise had been fulfilled in ways he could never have anticipated. His life indeed became richer, not through the accumulation of wealth, but through the deep contentment that comes from living in harmony with one's highest values and treating all beings with the respect and compassion they deserve. In one of his previous lives, long before he became the Buddha, the Bodhisattva was born as a prince in a royal family blessed with great wealth and comfort. Despite living surrounded by luxury and having access to every pleasure that material abundance could provide, this prince possessed a heart so filled with compassion that he could not bear to witness the suffering of any living being without feeling compelled to help. This particular quality of universal love had manifested in the prince from earliest childhood. While other royal children played with expensive toys and competed for their parents' attention, he would spend his time caring for injured birds, feeding stray animals, and finding ways to ease the burdens of the servants who worked in the palace. His compassion extended beyond his own species to embrace all forms of life with equal tenderness and concern. One day, the prince was traveling through a remote mountain forest with his retinue when they came upon a sight that would test the very limits of his compassionate heart. Hidden in a secluded grove, far from any human settlement, they discovered a tigress in the most desperate condition imaginable. The magnificent animal was emaciated from days of unsuccessful hunting, her ribs showing clearly through her once powerful frame, and her eyes dulled by the kind of hunger that threatens life itself. What made this situation even more heartbreaking was that the tigress was not suffering alone. Beside her lay several small cubs, weak and crying from their own hunger, completely dependent on their mother for survival, yet unable to receive the nourishment they desperately needed. The mother tiger had been searching for food for many days without success, and now lacked even the strength to continue hunting for the prey that might save both her own life and the lives of her offspring. The prince's companions, seeing this dangerous predator, immediately urged him to move away quickly before the desperate animal might attack them in her hunger-driven desperation. "Your Highness," they said with urgent concern, "this creature is clearly starving and therefore extremely dangerous. We should leave this area immediately and allow nature to take its course without putting ourselves at risk." But the prince found himself unable to turn away from this scene of suffering. Looking at the tigress and her cubs, he saw not a dangerous predator to be feared, but a mother facing the same universal struggle that touches all beings, the desire to protect her young and the anguish of being unable to provide what they need to survive. In that moment, the prince felt such overwhelming compassion that the distinction between his own welfare and the welfare of these suffering creatures seemed to dissolve completely. "My friends," the prince said to his concerned followers, his voice carrying the calm certainty of someone who had suddenly seen with perfect clarity what needed to be done, "I cannot leave knowing that these innocent beings will die from hunger when I have the power to save them. Please continue on your journey and do not wait for me. I have something I must do here." Despite their protests and pleas for him to reconsider, the prince sent his retinue away and remained alone with the starving tiger family. With a heart overflowing with love and a mind completely free from fear, he approached the weakened tigress and spoke to her with the gentleness of someone addressing a beloved friend. "Noble mother," he said softly, "I can see your suffering and the suffering of your precious cubs. I cannot bear to watch you starve when I have the ability to provide what you need. Please, take my life so that you and your children may live. Let my body become the nourishment that will restore your strength and allow you to care for your young ones." What happened next demonstrated the miraculous power of perfect compassion. As the prince lay down before the tigress, offering himself completely without reservation or fear, something extraordinary occurred that touched the very heart of existence itself. The tigress, sensing the pure love and selfless intention behind this incredible gift, found herself unable to simply take what was being offered. Instead of immediately attacking, the great cat seemed to pause in recognition of the profound sacrifice being made for her and her cubs. The prince's willingness to give his life so completely, asking nothing in return except that suffering beings be relieved of their pain, created a transformation that went far beyond the immediate physical situation. Through his ultimate act of compassion, the offering of his own life for the welfare of other beings, the prince demonstrated the highest possible expression of the love that knows no boundaries between self and other. His sacrifice embodied the truth that, when compassion becomes complete, when the heart opens so fully that personal survival becomes less important than the welfare of others, something sacred enters the world that has the power to transform even the most desperate circumstances. This story of the Bodhisattva's sacrifice teaches us that true love is not limited by the boundaries we normally place around our care and concern. When compassion becomes so pure that we would give everything for the welfare of another being, we discover that we have touched the very essence of what it means to be truly awake. The prince's willingness to die for a starving tigress shows us that the heart capable of such love has already transcended the ordinary fears and attachments that keep most beings trapped in the illusion of separation. In our own lives, while we may never face such an extreme test, we can remember that every act of genuine selflessness, every moment when we choose another's welfare over our own comfort, brings us closer to the boundless compassion that transforms both giver and receiver. As these ancient stories settle into your heart, like seeds finding fertile soil, take a moment to recognize the profound journey you have just completed. Over these past 3 hours, you have walked alongside Buddha through gardens of wisdom that reveal the deepest truths about human existence and the path to lasting peace. From the muddy water that clears when left undisturbed, you have learned that your mind naturally returns to stillness when you stop fighting against your thoughts. From the broken bowl, you discovered that letting go of attachments brings freedom rather than loss. Through the anger medicine of silence, you found that emotional storms pass when not fed by reactive words. Each story has been a mirror, reflecting back to you the Buddha nature that has always existed within your own heart. Like the beggar who possessed hidden wealth, you already carry everything needed for genuine happiness. Like the lost ox that was never truly missing, your peace has been waiting patiently for you to stop searching and simply recognize what is already here. Whether you are drifting towards sleep or carrying these teachings into your waking hours, remember that transformation happens gradually, gently, like water wearing smooth the sharpest stone. Each time you return to Moonlight Temple, these timeless truths will meet you exactly where you are, offering new depths of understanding and comfort. May you rest in the profound peace that comes from knowing you are never alone on this journey. May these Buddha stories continue to work their quiet magic in your heart, bringing you closer each day to the awakening that is your birthright. Until we meet again in this sacred space of wisdom and rest, may all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. May all beings be free.